Chapter 15-20. The failure of the plan made Mandarata feel great pressure. He had a bad feeling. This time, the Timur Empire was doomed. Even he wouldn't be able to turn the tide. The facts proved that his feeling was right. In the following period of time, bad news came one after another. First, they tried their best to get the internal troops to surrender, allowing the five-star army to finally have a safe path to attack. They split into two directions and attacked the Kazan Khanate to the east of the Timur Empire. The Kazan Khanate, which had already sent out troops to support, had a limited number of troops and could not stop the main force of the five-star army. In just half a month, the Ulu Khan followed the Baoli king and surrendered. Next, the hidden cavalry were suddenly surrounded by the five-star army on the west. These were the troops that had participated in the siege of Meng-yi-Shi. Their tracks were tracked by the Yang faction's air force. Eventually, they found their foothold and besieged them. With their inferior military strength, it was only a matter of time before they were completely wiped out. Finally, the five-star army on the east brought over large amounts of grain and various military resources. They passed through the north of the Timur Empire and into the hands of the five-star army on the west. With this, Yang Qindong did not need to worry about grain. In other words, even if they couldn't get rid of the Timur Empire before winter arrived, they would have enough conditions and ability to survive. If they could not do it today, they would fight tomorrow. In short, they would not return until they destroyed the enemy. As more and more bad news came, the originally high-spirited General Mandu Latu's hair turned white overnight. His expression also became much more haggard. All of this made Kanamu extremely anxious. He had already received news that not only had the Ili Kingdom's King Bao Lide and the Kazan Khanate surrendered to the five-star army, but even the Ilkhanate's Harsan Khan and the Norman Khanate's Saihan Khan had been captured by the five-star army. In other words, around the Timur Empire, other than the Crimean Khanate and a few small Khanates in the south, the other large factions of the alliance had already been destroyed by the five-star army. And all of this had only happened in a few months. Naturally, this was because the five-star army was strong and had advanced firearms. However, it was also because these people had weak resistance and did not usually rule the country. As a result, when danger came, civil strife occurred. For example, the Ili Kingdom's King Bao Lide had been persuaded by the previous Prime Minister Ali Pu. There was also the Ilkhanate's Harsan Khan who had misused Great General Alateng, and Wan Yen Hong betrayed Janabek Khan, which directly led to the capture of their capital and the destruction of their Khanate. External enemies and internal troubles allowed the five-star army to achieve so many military exploits and achievements in such a short period of time. Now, the Timur Empire was besieged on all sides. How long could they last? Not only was Khan Amur muttering in his heart, the various nobles of the Khanate also had their own thoughts. It was to the extent that there were people who publicly announced that they would surrender to the five-star army. The civil strife that Khan Amur was most worried about had begun. This was enough to make him vigilant. He sent out a large number of palace guards to keep an eye on those nobles who wanted to surrender, and gave the order to kill them without mercy if things went wrong. Among these palace guards, there was no lack of children from various influential families. They were originally arranged by the Khan's side to show their unity. Now that these guards were used, there was no way the news wouldn't spread. Not long after, the news spread everywhere. This was clearly Khan Amur's intention. He didn't want to kill all of these nobles just because they wanted to surrender, so he gave them an appropriate warning. It had to be said that this move had some effect. At the very least, it suppressed the voices of those who wanted to surrender. On the surface, it looked like the entire Timur Empire was united. The five-star army pressed forward step by step. In order to prevent problems with the supply line at the rear from occurring, they adopted a steady approach. As a result, the time they took to advance became longer and longer. In the blink of an eye, it was already the 11th month of the year 1464. Heavy snow began to fall, completely cutting off the five-star army's path of advance. With the weather like this, it was impossible for humans to resist. Yang Qindong ordered the army to stop advancing, and began to consolidate their own territories. While recuperating, they were preparing for another battle in the coming year. At the same time, Yang Qindong also began to have ideas about the Timur Empire. This idea wasn't to use military force to solve everything, but to use literature to control military force. Wasn't Great Khan Amur always worried about the internal problems? Since he was afraid of this, then let's give him this. Yang Qindong sent out a large number of intelligence agents and had them infiltrate Herat, the capital of the Timur Empire. He had them secretly contact those nobles who wanted to surrender. He also pointed out that it would be best to find some nobles who had a good relationship with great General Mandu Latu to persuade them. The reason why the Timur Empire was able to defend for so long, apart from the fact that their territory was too large, and that even the five-star army needed a lot of time to enter, was because of this wise and far-sighted great General Mandu Latu. This person was indeed worthy of being a great general of the Timur Empire, a famous general. The guerrilla tactics he used were mainly to harass the supply lines, and whenever he had the chance, he would besiege a small unit of the five-star army's cavalry. His actions had indeed brought a lot of trouble to the army's advance. If such a troublesome person could be dealt with, it would be equivalent to cutting off one of Khan Amur's arms. It would play a crucial role in taking down the Timur Empire in the coming year. This move was equivalent to a black tiger digging out the heart. If it succeeded, it would be extremely beneficial to the five-star army. However, the problem was that Mandu Latu had a very cautious personality. Whether it was assassination or picking out a person's flaws, it wasn't an easy task. Since they couldn't find any flaws in the person himself, then they would start from the people around him. They would make full use of Khan Amur's suspicious personality and make him take the initiative to suspect Mandu Latu. As long as this great Khan really did so, without Mandu Latu's command, the Timur Empire's cavalry would be like a tiger without teeth, and would no longer be a threat. At the same time, Yang Qindong ordered the formation of layers of encirclement around the Timur Empire, giving people the impression that as long as the weather permitted, the army would be able to destroy the Timur Empire at any time. In this way, under the pressure from the outside, there would be no need to worry about the enemy not attacking. Those who surrendered would definitely jump out. At that time, even if Mandu Latu was innocent, he would be dragged down. 1464 AD, the year of the destruction of the Khaganate in the historical records. It was precisely under the leadership of Yang Qindong that the five-star army achieved victory in the east and west, causing some small Khaganates and small factions to surrender. Not only did they expand Xianxia's territory, they also directly dealt with the last threat outside the Ming dynasty. It was not accurate to say that it was the last one, because when Yang Qindong and the Timur Empire were caught in a bitter battle, Bangra, that is Bangladesh to the west of Burma, suddenly sent troops to invade, resulting in the loss of 4 counties and 3 cities. 120,000 people were captured, and tens of thousands of houses were burned down. When this matter was reported to Yang Qindong, the five-star army nearby had already sent troops to rescue. Not only did the Myanmar army, the Laos army, the Vietnamese army, and the Cambodian army all moved out, even the Cold Front 1st Regiment that was patrolling nearby quickly rushed over. Although the 1st Regiment led by Bu Hai only had 2,000 people, they were a fully armed army. With them as the main force, and with the help of several local military regions, they were able to stop Bangla's army from entering. However, because the number of cavalry in the local army was very small, they could only defend against the enemy's mobile army. Yang Qindong took the telegram sent by the Navy the day before yesterday and found a piece of relevant information. He ordered, "Isn't Long Yun Tian of the 3rd Marine Division sending supplies from Sumatra? Let them take a detour into the Bay of Bengal and attack Chittagong for me. Create a situation where the army is pressuring the border and force their cavalry to retreat." Yes. Wang Shan, the head of the telecommunications department, took a pen and wrote down the order, then turned and went to the telegraph room. Beta Persei was left on the side with a pair of tiger-like eyes spewing out flames of anger. "Young master, let me take 10,000 cavalry and kill them. How can a small Bangla overturn the sky?" Just from Beta Persei's request for 10,000 troops, it was obvious that he didn't take the other party seriously. But Yang Qindong didn't think so. Today's Xianxia's momentum was so great that he even destroyed an old force like the Golden Horde. Logically speaking, no one would take the initiative to find trouble with him. But anyone who dares to do this must have something to rely on. And before he fully understands what's going on, he won't have any thoughts of underestimating the enemy. Seeing that Yang Qindong didn't agree to his request, Beta Persei had to take a step back and said, "Young master, the new 5th Army, the E-1st Army, and the E-2nd Army on the Eastern Front have all asked for battle. Why don't you just send an army to Bangla to ask for an explanation?" No. Now the main task is to clean up the Timur Empire. Other things can be put aside for the time being. Send a telegram to them. No one can act rashly without a military order. Yang Qindong shook his head again. At this moment, his eyes were incomparably deep, and if one looked carefully, they would reveal a murderous intent. Bangla's offensive behavior made him angry. He will remember this account first. After the Timur Empire is dealt with in the spring of next year, he will have the time to deal with them. Previously, he also considered that Bangla and the Southern Ming Empire were neighbors. If he attacked them, it would bring too much pressure to the Southern Ming Empire. After all, he had too many enemies before, and he didn't have the intention to attack the Southern Ming Empire. Chapter 1521. However, after the Golden Horde, the Rossi Principality, and the Tamerlane Khanate, which was about to be destroyed, became Yang's territory one after another, he had already conquered a large territory in the periphery. Now, it was time for him to settle his internal problems. The Southern Ming Empire and Baiming also needed an explanation. In Yang Chendong's opinion, whether it was the Southern Ming Empire or Baiming, it was best to settle the problem peacefully. After all, the people living there were all Han people, his own race. Yang Chendong was someone who believed that the Han people were supreme and respected. Naturally, he hoped that there would be more people to share the joy of the Han people standing high above. He didn't intend to use troops. This was also why Xianxia had been expanding his territory all these years. He tolerated Baiming and the Southern Ming Empire a lot. When Baiming broke the agreement several times and caused trouble for them, he only punished them slightly and didn't intend to send troops. However, it wasn't that easy to settle the problem peacefully. The Great Ming Empire still had a backbone. If the problem couldn't be solved peacefully, then they would have to use force. Then, he would use the opportunity of dealing with the Bangla Kingdom to make a show of force and see how the Southern Ming Empire would react. With a plan in mind, Yang Chendong looked at the information sent by the intelligence department in front of him. Bangla was the Sindhi kingdom of Han. The Eastern Han called it Jianghu. After that, the central Jianghu offered tribute to the Liang Empire, while the southern Jianghu offered tribute to the Wei Empire. The Tang Empire was divided into 5 Jianghu, also known as the 5 Hindus. Song Iran was known as Jianghu. Bangla was known as East India. King Abdul was also a warmonger. Otherwise, he wouldn't have agreed to the request of the king of the 3 provinces to send troops to the Southern Ming Empire to fight against the king of Shiping. However, if they thought that the 5-star army would be like the king of Shiping and only passively take a beating, then they were looking down on them too much. For now, he would let them be complacent for a while. After dealing with the Timur Empire in front of him, he would make the other party spit out everything they ate, including interest. Inform the Security Bureau and the CIA and ask them to send people to Bangla. I want to know everything that happened there, the reason for the sudden attack on Myanmar, and who played a role in this matter. I want to know everything. Yang Chendong's face was fierce and his voice was not loud, but when Beta Persei heard it, he could not help but shudder. He had a feeling that the young master was angry this time. In the city of Turkestan, the old capital of the Kazakh Khanate, Janilbek Khan was hiding there with 20,000 of his cavalry. When he learned that the Pungra kingdom had really sent out troops and attacked Xianxia's Burma province, he was so happy that he almost jumped up. Although this battle was not fought by him, it was a good thing to be able to find trouble with the Han army. With this matter, he waited for the 5-star army to mobilize, and then he would find an opportunity to break out. Yes, at this time, Janilbek Khan has been forced into the encirclement by the 5-star army's Eastern Front army. He didn't dare to break out of the encirclement rashly. Not to mention that because of the heavy snow, the warhorse couldn't play its role at all. If he were to attack and attract the attention of the 5-star army, he wouldn't have the confidence to escape if the army surrounded him. Hiding in the old capital of Turkestan, relying on the heavy snow, no one would find trouble with him now. What he needed to do was to find a way to save himself. After learning that Amur Khan was instigating Bangla to send troops, he immediately sent people to contact the other party and made all kinds of promises. In short, as long as the other party could help him out, he was willing to give half of his property, population, and territory to the other party. It can be said that in order to protect himself, Janilbek Khan promised everything he could. The next step was to wait bitterly, waiting for the news of the war to relieve his pressure. Now that he finally heard the good news and learned that the Pungra kingdom had indeed sent troops, the feeling was like being enveloped by the warm sun in the cold winter, making him feel very comfortable. Immediately send out scouts and keep an eye on the 5-star army's movements. As long as they show signs of leaving, Immediately report back. Janalbek Khan said with a slight excitement in his voice. A group of scouts left Turkestan under the order. But whether it was Janalbek Khan or those scouts, they didn't know that in front of an inconspicuous pile of snow on the outskirts of Turkestan, a group of dozens of people was closely watching every movement. When those scouts left the city, they saw this scene with their own eyes. Reluctantly putting down the binoculars in his hand, Wan Yanhong sighed in his heart at the power of this object. He whispered to Bai Shuang, who was lying on the snow beside him. "That's right, I know some of these scouts. They are the trusted aides of the Great Khan, and they usually don't leave Janalbek Khan's side. Oh, so this Great Khan is very likely to be hiding in this city." After Bai Shuang heard this, a smile appeared in his eyes. He finally caught a big fish. The Eastern Front had been fighting with the Kazakh cavalry for a long time, but because the terrain of Ili wasn't suitable for a large cavalry legion to fight, they couldn't display their advantage. In the end, they didn't gain enough advantage. Now that Ili had surrendered, the Five-Star Army's main force on the Eastern Front could smoothly advance. But because the position of the E Army was relatively far behind, by the time Bai Shuang received the news, the new army had already set off and met up with the main force of the world's first cavalry legion in Akmo City. Then, they moved side by side to surround the Timur Empire. He had once walked out of the world's first cavalry legion, and had interacted with the new army many times. Bai Shuang was very familiar with these two armies. It was also because of this familiarity that he knew how difficult it was to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. Instead of racking his brains to think of ways to snatch merit from these two strongest armies, it was better to find a shortcut. Bai Shuang led the E army to search for the main force of the Kazakh army. He also invited Wan Yanhong, who was very familiar with the situation of the Kazakh Khanate, to guide them. In the end, their target was the old capital of the Kazakh Khanate, Turkestan City. Logically speaking, even if it was the old capital, as long as Janabek Khan had the slightest bit of intelligence, he wouldn't be hiding there. However, this person was playing the game of darkness and was hiding there. Before, this was only Wan Yanhong's analysis. In his eyes, his Khan was a person who liked to take risks. But now, when he saw the scouts leave the city, his guess became reality. After knowing where the target was hiding, Bai Shuang's eyes flashed with a light of wisdom. He knew that it was time to draw in the net. Right now, it was snowing heavily outside, blocking the road. But because of this, no one would think that they would choose to attack in such bad weather. This was where his advantage lay. As long as the method of surprise attack was correct, even the heavy snow wouldn't be able to stop Janabek Khan from becoming their prisoner or a ghost under their blade. Leave a group of people to continue watching. Everyone else, retreat with me. After Bai Shuang made up his mind, just like when he came, he quietly retreated from outside the city. On the third day, 5,000 five-star army soldiers wearing white cloaks began to approach Turkestan City under the cover of darkness. The one who received the surprise attack mission was Zhuang Cheng, the commander of the Direct Military Guard Regiment, and some soldiers from the 301st Division. The 5,000 white cloaks were also part of the EE Army's stockpile. Under the white snow, the white cloaks were the best concealment items. Unless the moonlight was particularly strong, it would be very difficult to be discovered with one's eyesight. Coincidentally, the night Zhuang Cheng attacked was very dark, and the visibility was only 7 or 8 steps away. When the 5,000 soldiers crept closer to the city, the Kazakh soldiers on the city wall didn't notice them at all. Perhaps in their eyes, on such a cold night with such heavy snow outside, it was impossible for anyone to attack them. This was human nature. Many times, taking things for granted would lead to a big mistake. When Janabek Khan promised to let Bangla attack Xianxia, his fate was already sealed. The night was very cold, about -30 degrees Celsius. Lying in a pile of snow, even though he was wearing a military coat full of cotton, as long as he didn't move for a while, his body would immediately turn cold. Even so, not a single soldier complained about being tired. Therefore, everyone was holding back, waiting for the moment to erupt, because they would not forget that once this operation was successful, everyone who participated in the battle would have a meritorious service, and that would be a reward of shining silver. And if the meritorious service was too great, in their hometown, the government would beat gongs and beat drums to send food and oil. That was a very glorious thing, and also what every soldier hoped for. Time passed by slowly. Behind Zhuang Cheng, Bai Shuang also brought the Yi army's main force of over 30,000 people. Seeing that there was only a vast expanse of white in front of them, Tu Hai, the commander of the 301st Division, couldn't help but ask worriedly, "Commander, do you think Commander Zhuang and the others will be fine? After all, the weather is so cold." "Nothing will happen. We have to believe in our comrades." Bai Shuang's gaze was resolute as he looked forward. After that, he silently said in his heart, "The soldiers must hold on for another hour. When midnight comes, it will be time for them to launch an all-out attack." It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Bai Shuang and the Yi army's feelings were like a year. However, since things had reached this point, they could only continue to hold on. Even Bai Shuang had to admit that he had underestimated the cold weather. For example, he had only waited for a short while, but his entire body was already stiff. However, the arrow on the bow had to be shot. Chapter 1522. How much longer until midnight? Bai Shuang had asked this question countless times, and Xiao Qing, the commander of the 1st Battalion of the Guard Regiment, had answered it countless times. Finally, when there were less than 3 minutes left, his voice was filled with excitement as he said, "General, there are still 3 minutes left." "Good, good. Pass down the order. All troops get ready to charge." Turning his head to look at the dense crowd behind him, the corners of Bai Shuang's mouth trembled as he spoke. Because of the snow, more than 30,000 people were changed from cavalry to infantry, which made them unable to take advantage of their speed. They would have to rely on their feet to charge, but he believed that even so, victory would definitely belong to them. Because they had a strong and firm belief. On the city wall of Turkmenistan, the 5,000 five-star army soldiers began to slowly unfreeze from their frozen state. One by one, the soldiers slowly raised their heads, revealing a determined gaze. After waiting for more than 2 hours, the bone-chilling wind had already penetrated their clothes and entered their bodies. Many people had already suffered from slight frostbite. But everyone was in a good state of mind. Perhaps this was what it meant when there was a great reward. When the time was almost up, with Commander Zhuang Cheng taking the lead, everyone slowly raised their heads. Then, the soldiers of the assault team took out their throwing hooks and threw them up the city wall. With the sound of the wind at night, no one even cared about the sound of the triangular anchor stuck on the city wall. Then, the assault team members climbed up one by one like agile monkeys and went straight to the almost undefended city wall of Turkmenistan. It was incorrect to say that there was no defense. Although Janibek Khan didn't want people to know that he was in the city, he still arranged for patrols on the city wall. But because it was midnight, and it was freezing outside, no one thought that someone would attack the city at this time. The patrols on the city wall had already huddled up in a shelter from the wind and were sitting together to warm each other. The people on duty at this time weren't very lucky and were full of complaints. They were lazy and didn't need to worry about the officers coming to check on them. After all, in this kind of weather, who wouldn't want to stay in their warm beds and not come out? The direct result of this was that after the commandos ascended the tower, no one could stop them. It was only until a small group of 30 people took advantage of the darkness to sneak down the stairs that they discovered a group of 50 Kazakh soldiers. They were huddled together, some were sleeping, some were talking, and some were trying to distract themselves. 30 against 50. If it was a direct confrontation, it was obvious that the side with fewer people would be at a disadvantage. But at this time, the side with more people was completely unprepared, and the side with fewer people were all fierce assault team members. The result would be the right one. After seeing this formation, the assault squad leader named by Zhuang Cheng made a few hand gestures in the dark. Immediately, 20 of his squad members split up to flank the enemy from the left and right. Another 10 squad members saw an opportune moment and sprinted towards the passageway leading to the bottom of the city tower like leopards. The sudden movement quickly attracted the attention of a few soldiers who were chatting, but they didn't have the chance to shout anything. A black shadow suddenly appeared in front of them, and the sharp blade slashed across their throats. One after another, the Kazakh soldiers didn't even have the chance to shout before they felt the strength in their bodies being sucked out. Then, the figure swayed and fell to the ground with a plop. After that, more and more commandos appeared. This patrol team of 50 people either watched with their eyes wide open as they were killed by Dao Feng or lost consciousness while still in their dreams. From the beginning to the end, no more than 2 minutes had passed, and there was no other movement. Phew! After inspecting the corpses of the enemy soldiers, he discovered that all of them were dead. After confirming that there were no hidden dangers, the assault team leader breathed a long sigh of relief. Then, he listened to the movements downstairs and discovered the sounds of wild cats. He knew that the people downstairs had also succeeded. Thinking about it, the defense of the most dangerous city wall was already so lax. There was no need to talk about the situation downstairs. Whether or not there was anyone watching was another matter. Being able to succeed was a matter of course. Everything went smoothly as planned. The assault team leader responded to the sounds of the wild cats downstairs, telling them to open the city gates and prepare to welcome the army at any time. He even took out a match from his bosom and lit up a torch that he had prepared beforehand. In the cold night, the sudden appearance of a fire and warmth made people unable to help but feel a sense of trust. However, the assault team leader didn't intend to use this opportunity to warm himself up. He lit up the torch to signal to Xianxia below. After seeing that everything was in place, he raised the torch up high. In the darkness, the light was so clear and eye-catching. The assault team has succeeded. All soldiers, listen to my orders. Attack! Xianxia had been searching and waiting this entire time. When he saw the signal, Xianxia couldn't hold himself back and stood out from the cold snow. Then, more soldiers in white cloaks stood up beside him. As if to cooperate with them, the city gate several dozen steps away slowly opened from the inside. In the silent night, the creaking sounds of the city gate opening were especially sharp. What's going on? Why did the city gate open? Who gave the order? This kind of movement finally attracted angry curses and reprimands. Through his studies, Xianxia, who understood the language of the Kazakh Khanate, knew that his plan had been discovered. He had to hurry up. He didn't care about hiding his identity and shouted, "All soldiers, follow this commander and attack. Kill the enemy and gain merit. Kill the enemy and gain merit." This kind of shout instantly attracted more voices of agreement. Then, the 5,000 soldiers charged forward with high fighting spirit. Due to the cold weather, some of the warriors even fell to the ground while running. That was because their bodies were stiff. However, when they got up and moved their bodies and found that there wasn't much of a problem, they continued to shout and charge. Behind them, when the torches on the city gate were lit, Commander Bai Shuang had led the main force of the foreign army to charge. In comparison, they were afraid of being discovered by the enemy, so they were further away. They also didn't have the help of war horses, so they had to rely on their feet. However, no matter what the conditions were, they had to quickly enter the city. Otherwise, the pressure on the 5,000 vanguard soldiers would increase. No one knew how many of these 5,000 warriors were still able to fight in such bad weather. First, there was the sound of the city gate opening, followed by the sounds of fighting and killing. When the other city guards heard this, they instantly understood what had happened. More and more people began to gather at the city gate. They were also shocked at how the enemy had managed to sneak in and open the city gate in such cold weather. However, no matter what should have happened had already happened. Now, the only thing they had to do was to chase the invaders out. Otherwise they would all die here. The movement at the city gate quickly spread to Jianghu Khan's ears. This Kazakh Khan suddenly jumped up from his bed and shouted, "How is this possible? In such heavy snow, war horses can't be used at all. In such cold weather, they have traveled so far. Which army can withstand such cold weather? Also, how did they know that this Khan was in the city? There must be a traitor. Yes, there must be a traitor." Of course there was a traitor. However, it wasn't someone in the city like Jianghu Khan thought. It was Wanyan Hong from the Wanyan family, whom he had been suppressing. At this time, it was clearly not wise to be tangled up in this matter. After Jianghu Khan vented his dissatisfaction by shouting, he also thought of this problem. He immediately ordered, "Send out all the troops in the city. Send them out and chase the enemy out of the city gate. There shouldn't be too many of them. Otherwise, our scouts would have discovered them. As long as we chase them out of the city, they won't be able to do anything to us with the city gate as cover. In such cold weather, they will retreat without attacking. Tell these words to the generals. If they want to survive, they must use all their strength to kill the enemy." Jianghu Khan's analysis was reasonable. When his words reached the ears of the generals, they also deeply agreed with him. Then, nearly 20,000 troops in the city were mobilized and pressed against the east gate that had been opened. At this moment, There was an intense battle going on at the East Gate. It was only because Xianxia and the others were fast enough that they managed to enter the city before the city gates were forcefully closed. However, in order to defend the city gate, they paid the price. Only 2 of the 30 commandos were left, and both of them were slightly injured. The enemy is not weak. We must not be careless. Seeing that the commandos were almost completely wiped out in a short period of time, Xianxia felt immense pressure. When he turned around to look at his soldiers, most of them had pale faces and were trembling all over. He knew that the long period of hiding had greatly affected their combat strength. With their current strength, if the enemy counterattacked too fiercely, it was hard to say if they could wait until the main force arrived. Since they had already launched the attack, there was no reason to give up halfway. Xianxia gritted his teeth and said to the soldiers who were still trembling because of the cold, "Don't be afraid, everyone. Try to move your limbs as much as possible. There will be a great battle soon. We must hold on until the main force arrives. When that time comes, everyone will be heroes. Our families will also benefit from our efforts today." Chapter 15:23. For our families fight. When the soldiers heard these words of encouragement, many of their faces were filled with determination. They took the opportunity to move their bodies, stretching their arms and kicking their legs, hoping to force the cold out of their bodies and regain their mobility. The sound of footsteps became more and more frequent. In the dark night, the number of black shadows in front of them also gradually increased. Xianxia led the soldiers to see all of this. He felt that the reaction of the Kazakh soldiers was indeed fast. They were worthy of being the elites by Janibek Khan's side. However, at the same time, they could not hold the weapons in their hands tightly. They were prepared to fight to the death. "Archers, get ready. Fire." When he felt that the enemy was less than 70 steps away from them, Xianxia shouted loudly. The archers who had just gathered together fired a round of arrows. They could clearly feel that many of the black shadows in the distance were shot down. "Archers, fire." After the initial panic, the black shadows on the opposite side quickly reacted. Then, the same military order was given. Then the sky was covered with arrows, and they fell on the vanguard led by Xianxia. Although they were prepared, and some of the soldiers took out their shields, facing the dense rain of arrows, many of them were still hit. In a short period of time, hundreds of soldiers were killed by the arrows. Kill! When the distance was close, the arrows were obviously not suitable. The Kazakh general ordered the soldiers to charge. In this regard, Xianxia was unwilling to pass on his responsibility. Although the number of soldiers he brought was small, he still shouted the slogan to charge and kill. The confrontation between the two armies was like this. Putting aside the fact that the brave would win in a narrow path, when faced with the enemy's attack, if one side retreated out of fear, the morale of the soldiers would plummet, and they would be defeated like a mountain. Shouts of killing continuously sounded. Regardless of whether they were willing or not, in the end, the soldiers of both sides fought together in front of the East Gate. When the weapons collided with each other, the black shadows fell to the ground one after another, and blood splattered everywhere. In such a chaotic situation, the so-called martial prowess was no longer important. The battle was to see which side's formation was more solid, whose killing intent was more ruthless, whose willpower was more firm. Every swing of the saber, sword, or spear could be the last action of their lives. No one would be careless, and no one dared to be careless. It was as if two ferocious beasts had collided. Under the impact, they were all riddled with wounds and suffered heavy casualties. The number of casualties was almost 1-to-1, and the number of people in Xianxia's team was greatly reduced. There was nothing the commander could do about it. The only thing he could do was to keep looking outside the city to see where Commander Bai Shuang was leading the army. Speaking of which, the E army was composed of all non-humankind young men. They came from different places, had different beliefs, and different habits. Gathering these people together was already a problem. Wanting to tie them together into a rope and organize them into a powerful fighting force was even more difficult. Even though Commander Bai Shuang had put in a lot of effort for this and had basically eliminated the barriers between the different races, their combat strength was still far inferior to the veteran New Third Army and other veteran armies. Compared to the world's first cavalry army, the gap between them was unimaginably huge. Many times, the E army would win because they had more people and momentum. They would win because Commander Bai Shuang's command was correct. Once it was a one-on-one battle, their weak side would be exposed, just like what was happening right now. After a quarter of an hour of battle, Xianxia could feel that there were more casualties on his side. Apart from the fact that they were lying in the cold snow and couldn't use their full strength, it was also because their fighting ability and numbers were inferior. It was also thanks to the East City Gate's terrain that they couldn't place more troops at the same time. Otherwise, it would be difficult for them to hold on for more than a minute. Press on with the reserves. No matter what, we can't abandon the city gate, even if we have to fight to the last man. Xianxia said with a serious expression. When he said this, he was already prepared to sacrifice himself. He absolutely could not allow the East Gate to be snatched back by the enemy. If that happened, their strategic intentions would be exposed, and it would be very difficult to deal with Janelbek Khan, who had the city wall to rely on. This was the time for the E army to amaze the world. In the cold weather, all the 5-star army were resting, but only the E army took the initiative to attack. If they could achieve a great victory, their influence would undoubtedly be even more shocking. The name of the E army would also resound throughout the 5-star army. At that time, who would dare to look down on them? In order to kill the enemy and gain merit, for the E army, Xianxia was willing to give up his life. Unless he died, he would never let the enemy regain control of the gate. Quick! Faster! Those who can run, run first. Don't worry about the formation. Bai Shuang led more than 30,000 soldiers and ran over from 5 miles away. At this time, even the soldiers with good stamina were panting. If he were to run on flat ground, the distance of only 5 miles was nothing to him. He would be able to rush over with his army in less than a quarter of an hour. Moreover, he would have the ability to join the battle immediately. However, in the heavy snow, it was a different story. The snow was knee-high, and every step was very difficult. Many times, when one stepped on an empty space while flying at a high speed, it was possible for one to sink into the ground. Even if they stepped on the ground, they would often pull out one leg and the other leg would sink into the snow. In such an environment, it was impossible to make use of the advantage of speed. Therefore, after walking for a quarter of an hour, they didn't even cover half of the distance of 5 miles. If they continued like this, it was impossible to reach the gate in time. This would increase the pressure on Commander Xianxia. It was even possible that he would abandon the gate. In a moment of desperation, Bai Shuang saw too high of the 301st Division. He was leading hundreds of soldiers to clear the path for everyone, and he was even stopping to wait for the main force of the army. He had an idea and gave the order to attack alone without the need for a group. The first 10,000 people to reach the gate will be rewarded with military merit. Once Bai Shuang gave the order, Tu Hai was only stunned for a moment before he left the formation of the army and began to speed up. Behind him, there were hundreds of people following closely. Even further away, there were hundreds and thousands of people who also began to speed up, trying their best to run forward. The speed of the army finally increased, and Bai Shuang couldn't help but sigh in relief. Now, it was up to Xianxia and the others to see how long they could hold on. This time, they couldn't lose no matter what. This was a good opportunity for the E army to make a name for themselves. For this reason, Bai Shuang didn't ask for help from the Cold Front 4th Division on the Eastern Front. Otherwise, with an army with firearms, they wouldn't care about the city walls of Turkmenistan. Bai Shuang was a little nervous, but Xianxia at the East Gate had already forgotten what nervousness was. When he saw wave after wave of soldiers charging up and falling down, and when the smell of blood reached his nose, he had already disregarded life and death. At this moment, there was only the enemy in his eyes. There was only killing the enemy. Perhaps it was because the 5-star army's counterattack wasn't intense, but the Kazakh soldiers' morale was greatly boosted. After seeing that there weren't many enemies, their courage was boosted, and they charged even more fiercely. Furthermore, they had all crawled out of their warm beds and had never experienced frostbite before, so they could unleash their full strength. In comparison, the 5-star army's side seemed to be at a disadvantage. After another 15 minutes, less than 800 of the 5,000 vanguard soldiers were left. This was the last of Xianxia's strength. Seeing so many of their comrades die in front of them, the remaining 800 people's eyes were red, and the veins on their hands holding their swords were popping out, reflecting their anger. Even if they joined the 5-star army, even if they joined a different army, it was tantamount to tying their fates together. Without a military order, They could only advance and not retreat. This was an iron law. If anyone dared to disobey, not only would they be beheaded, even their family would be implicated. Their family would have to bear the name of a deserter and live a difficult life. Whether it was for their own dignity or for their family, these 800 people couldn't retreat. Either they killed the enemies charging at them, or they were killed by the enemies. There was no third way. Come, fight for yourself, fight for your family. Xianxia pulled out his sword and said with a murderous look on his face, "Fight, fight for our family." The 800 warriors all shouted in unison and took out their weapons. Under Xianxia's lead, they charged at the charging Kazakh soldiers. With Xianxia taking the lead, no one was able to block his sharp saber. Several Kazakh soldiers were cut down and fell to the ground. This scene greatly stimulated the other soldiers, causing their morale to suddenly soar in a short period of time. They forced the Kazakh soldiers to retreat by a distance of nearly 10 feet. As the saying goes, a soldier is strong, while a general is strong. Xianxia's bravery set an example for the other soldiers, allowing them to display their own potential and make a temporary turnaround. The Kazakh soldiers didn't expect this result. When many of the Kiliarchs saw that the 5-star army was at the end of their rope, they couldn't help but have a fearful expression. As the saying goes, the unreasonable are afraid of the reckless, and the reckless are afraid of those who don't care about their lives. When facing enemies who didn't care about their lives, the fear in their bones would unconsciously jump out. Chapter 1524. There is a large number of 5-star army outside the city. They are getting closer and closer. After both sides stopped fighting for a short moment, a shout suddenly sounded from the city gate tower that had already been recaptured. When this shout entered the ears of the Kiliarchs, they immediately reacted. "Kill them. We cannot allow them to join up with the reinforcements. Immediately recapture the city gate. When the time comes, we will have the advantage of the city wall and will be able to defend the city. Otherwise, all of us will be killed by the 5-star army." A Kazakh Kiliarch loudly shouted, revealing everyone's situation. Under this kind of shout, the Kazakh soldiers who originally wanted to avoid the brunt of the attack were unable to retreat. If they didn't kill all of the 5-star army in front of them, then the next one to die would be them. This was an extremely easy decision to make. If it wasn't you who died, then it was me who died. Of course, everyone would choose to die for their opponent. Under the loud shouts, the Kazakh soldiers suddenly reacted even more fiercely than before. At one point, the 800 warriors led by Xianxia suffered disastrous casualties. In a single round, more than 300 corpses were thrown down. At the same time, they also retreated more than 6 zhang. The eastern city gate was only 5 zhang behind them. If they retreated a bit more, then they might be blasted out of the city gate. If the city gate was closed, then even if they survived, what meaning would there be? Stomping his foot and gritting his teeth, Xianxia's face revealed a resolute expression as he loudly shouted, "Warriors, behind us is the city gate. We already have no way to retreat. Now, let us spill the last drop of blood in our bodies and stake it all against the enemy." Stake it all. There were less than 500 people left, and there was no longer any fear on their faces. Under the premise that they already knew the result, they were instead afraid that they would leave. Right now, they were only thinking about how many enemies they could kill before they died. Killing one was enough. Killing 2 was a profit. Even if a warrior didn't go to school, they would still calculate the gains and losses. Xianxia and the others began to unleash the last of their strength. Under the full-force counterattack of nearly 500 men, under Xianxia's leadership, they didn't retreat a single step. Only when there were less than 100 men left, and almost all of them were injured, did the Kazakh soldiers on the city gate tower begin to shout and release arrows from above their heads. Needless to say, the reinforcements from the 5-star army had arrived. When they heard this voice, Xianxia and the others seemed to be filled with energy in an instant. The 100 of them unleashed their last bit of potential. One by one, they brandished their swords and charged towards the endless stream of Kazakh soldiers. There were at least 3,000 Kazakh soldiers on the other side, and with the momentum of 100 charging soldiers, they were like a small boat in the middle of a huge wave, drifting unsteadily, as if there was a possibility of capsizing at any time. But even so, none of the warriors retreated. Instead, they stood there firmly like stone statues, not moving an inch. Zhuangqing already had 4 knife wounds, 2 gunshot wounds, and 1 sword wound. At this time, his eyes were already in a trance, and because of his exhaustion and excessive blood loss, he couldn't see clearly what was in front of him. But under his instincts, he continued to brandish his sword, trying to kill as many enemies as possible. Regiment commander, you should step back. As long as you are still here, our guard regiment may be rebuilt. One of the guards of the Yi army took the initiative to come to Zhuangqing's side. Then with a light push, he pushed Zhuangqing to the back from the side. The soldier who already had 2 knife wounds on his body replaced Zhuangqing's position. He stood there entangled with the 3 Kazakh soldiers. Even a good tiger couldn't withstand a pack of wolves. Not to mention, this soldier was already an arrow at the end of its flight. If not for his conviction supporting him, he would have already fallen to the ground. 1 against 3, and with his own injuries, he only managed to slash out twice. He didn't even manage to injure any of the enemies. Then, he felt a huge force colliding with the blade in his hand. Finally, the long blade was knocked away. His entire body was also sent flying after being hit by the blade. The fallen soldier fell beside Zhuangqing. Looking at the soldier who had just saved him, Zhuangqing, who had recovered some of his vision, had tears in his eyes. Shiguang, how are you? How are you? Hearing the regiment commander's call, this soldier named Shiguang, who was originally from Laos, slowly opened his eyes. He forced a smile on his face and said, Regiment commander, I persevered until the end. Can it be considered a meritorious service? Can my family bask in the glory? Yes, you have done a meritorious service. The military merits you have accumulated are enough to allow you to leave your registration and enter the Han dynasty. In the future, you will be a Han citizen. Your family will also be proud of you. Zhuangqing recognized this soldier. When he joined the army, he was very timid. However, after knowing that he could leave his registration and enter the Han dynasty, he seemed to have changed into a different person. He became extremely hardworking. In this battle, he had killed at least 3 enemies, and had persevered until the end. Killing 3 people in addition to the military merits before, he indeed had the qualifications to leave his registration and enter the Han dynasty. Zhuangqing wasn't lying to him when he said those words. Instead, he just wanted him to leave safely. Is that so? That's great. I have a younger brother who can help me enter the Han dynasty. In the future, when I am no longer around, my family will have to rely on him. Is that okay? Regiment commander? Shiguang's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Perhaps that was the final radiance of a dying person. Yes, as the regiment commander, I promise you. Tears flowed from Zhuangqing's eyes. At this moment, Zhuangqing was covered in tears. Thank you, regiment commander. The soldier named Shiguang finally smiled and closed his eyes. However, this closure would become permanent. Looking at the dead warrior who had just saved him lying in his arms, Zhuangqing felt a surge of anger. He didn't know where he got the strength, but he stood up again. He pulled out his sword and slashed at the Kazakh soldiers who were charging at him. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes. He did not know how many slashes he had made, nor did he know if he had killed anyone. Zhuangqing only felt that the sky in front of him was dark. That was the sign of his physical strength being used to the extreme. Just when he was about to fall to the ground, a strong arm suddenly caught him. Following that, Division Commander Tu Hai's loud voice sounded in his ears. Regiment Commander Zhuang, you have completed the mission very well. Now you are very tired. You should go and rest. Men, is there any medical staff? Immediately save him. This was the voice that Zhuangqing heard before he fainted. He did not know whether it was an illusion or reality. After that, he completely closed his eyes. Division Commander Tu Hai had arrived. He brought more than 1,000 soldiers with him. Behind them, more and more soldiers from the other army were entering the city from the east gate. In the eyes of the Kazakh Kiliarchs, they knew that the situation was over, and everything was over. With no hope left, some of them simply abandoned their weapons and knelt on the ground to surrender. There were also some who directly ran towards the other city gates. They did not want to surrender to the 5-star army, so they could only risk charging into the harsh environment where snow was everywhere in order to survive. Janalbek Khan did not escape. He had no place to escape. He also did not think that the five-star army could really enter the city. Just a moment ago, someone had reported that the five-star army could be driven out of the city. However, in just a short while, the five-star army actually entered the city. With such a huge contrast, Janalbek Khan didn't even have time to prepare before he heard even worse news. The place where he lived, which used to be the Kazakh Imperial Palace, was surrounded by the five-star army. With a plop, Janalbek Khan fell to the ground. He knew that from today onwards, there would no longer be a Khan behind his name. He would become a prisoner. Perhaps he would be killed. Perhaps he would live in a dungeon forever. A sharp scimitar was unknowingly in his hand. Janalbek Khan wanted to end his life. He did not want to be a prisoner. He did not want to be treated like a prisoner. However, when the scimitar was placed on his neck several times, he finally put it down powerlessly. He did not have the courage to do so. It was also at this time that Janalbek Khan realized that he was a coward. He did not even have the courage to die. At this time, he was in tears. He hated himself for being a coward. Even when countless soldiers from the five-star army rushed in and dragged him away, his tears still didn't stop. The EE army actually managed to capture the city of Gelkistan when it was snowing heavily and captured the Kazakh Khan Janalbek. When the news spread, Amur, who was in Herat city, heard it and was shocked. He knew very well how difficult it was to launch an attack in the snow. The cold weather was likely to reduce the number of soldiers by a quarter or more. Not to mention the fact that they had to attack the city in such weather. The news showed that the five-star army did not use any firearms to capture Turkmenistan city. Doesn't this mean that even in a battle of cold weapons, the five-star army is quite strong? At this moment, Amur felt that he could not see any hope. Not only did Amur have such thoughts, everyone in the royal city was shocked when they heard the news. Some of the capitulators had their own thoughts. They firmly believed that the five-star army was invincible and decided to surrender. As for those who supported the war, some of them were unconsciously shaken. Even if they didn't think for themselves, they still had to think for their families. If they still insisted on going to war, and the five-star army really defeated them and took over the royal city, as the pro-war faction, where would they go from here? This kind of thinking also affected Great General Manjalatu. Originally, it was just some influential people who sent him messages. Their words were full of the idea of surrender. What five-star army was invincible was everywhere. But now, even some of the generals under his command began to waver. This made him deeply distressed. He suddenly became worried about this war that he was originally confident in. When he took the initiative to find Amur and told him about his confusion and the situation in the army, he finally got some good news. That is, after the five-star army went to the rear, there was another force called the Great Ming Dynasty that also attacked the rear of the five-star army. The damage caused was even greater. Chapter 1525. The chaos in the rear of the five-star army meant that the Timur Empire's opportunity had arrived. According to Khan Amur's plan, as long as they could withstand the first wave of attacks from the five-star army, the other side would be forced to retreat and deal with their internal problems first. Once that happened, they would have a chance to catch their breath. Although placing the hope of survival on someone else wasn't a smart move, it wasn't a smart move. But at this moment, without a better choice, Mandula too could only think like this. The king of the three provinces was Zhu Huaiqiu. Originally, he had a good relationship with Bangla and they had worked together to deal with Shiping King Mu's family. Now that they were working together to deal with the five-star army, it wasn't surprising. Even so, when the telegram reached the ears of Yang Chendong, who was waiting for the beginning of spring in the snow, it still aroused his anger. He already knew that Zhu Huaiqiu was a two-faced person and sent troops to guard against him. But after Bangla invaded Burma, Yang Chendong moved the troops to deal with the problem there. He didn't expect Zhu Huaiqiu to make a move at this time. It had to be said that Zhu Huaiqiu grasped the opportunity very well. At least he caught the five-star army off guard. Send a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and tell them to put pressure on the Southern Ming Empire. Zhu Huaiqiu is the king of the three provinces. Now that he suddenly sent troops, they have the right to control it. Also, send a telegram to the 1st Division of the Cold Front to stop training new recruits and go to Yunnan province. We want to show some people how powerful we are. Yang Chendong said with a deep expression. Hearing that the 1st Division of the Cold Front was mobilized, Beta Persei's eyes flashed with surprise. Even if they were all part of the Cold Front, there were differences in strength. For example, the first division of the Cold Front was the most elite of the Cold Front. If entering the Cold Front was a very difficult thing, then entering the first division of the Cold Front was even more difficult. Their test was second only to the Black Cavalry. Because of this, they shouldered the task of training the new Cold Front. Everyone was an instructor, and everyone was the backbone. Even an ordinary soldier could calmly become an outstanding squad leader. This was simply a teaching brigade. One could imagine how powerful such an army would be. Coupled with the fact that they were fully equipped with firearms, their combat prowess was astonishing enough to deter any opponent. Now that the young master had sent this army, it was obvious that he hated Zhu Huixin. The telegram was transmitted to the headquarters of the army in Crimson City. After receiving the telegram, Lang Song immediately ordered someone to summon the commander of the 1st Division, Tang Shan. In less than half an hour, Tang Shan, who was riding an electric motorcycle, appeared at the headquarters. It had been some time since the engine was successfully developed, and it had been used in many fields. Among them, there were many battery-powered vehicles. When this thing was first born, it truly frightened many people. Especially when they saw that this thing did not require manpower to move, and it was not slow at all. Everyone was completely convinced by science. This was especially true for those scholars who had been lured from northern Ming and southern Ming to Crimson City through various channels. They didn't dare to spout nonsense and pick on the flaws in science. On the contrary, many people began to change their subject. They put aside the 4 books and 5 classics and asked about applying to Xianxia Academy. As the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front, Tang Shan was definitely one of the oldest people following Yang Chendong. Even though he was only a major general and a division commander, he was still a commander. However, even if he was given the position of commander of a group army, he would not be able to exchange for this position. He was the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front, and his existence was equivalent to the leader of a teaching brigade. At least 60% of the soldiers of the Cold Front were indirectly or directly related to him. They were either his students or his students' students. A person with this kind of experience naturally had to own a battery-powered vehicle. When he rode past in a flashy manner, followed by a group of panting guards who were chasing after him on bicycles, there was no need to mention the smugness on his face. Tang Shan came to the office of the deputy commander of the army headquarters, Lang Song. After he knocked on the door and entered, he saluted and sat on the guest chair in the office. He poured himself a cup of hot tea and asked with a smile, "Lang Song, do you have any instructions? Is there a tough battle that you want our division to fight?" When Tang Shan asked this question, he still spoke in a joking tone. He knew very well that on the surface, he was a division commander, but in reality, he was the leader of the teaching brigade of the Cold Front. From time to time, he would also be the leader of the training brigade of the new corps and even the recruit division. There were too few times when he would be needed on the battlefield. Even though he also heard that Myanmar was not peaceful right now, and that Vietnam was also caught in the whirlpool of war, he still did not think that he would be needed. This sentence was more of a joke than anything else. What he did not expect was that Lang Song, who heard this sentence, had a shocked look on his face. "What? You already know about it? What do you mean? What do you mean?" At this moment, Tang Shan suddenly stood up. He felt that he seemed to be right. Could it be that he was really needed in the future? If that was the case, it could not be better. At this moment, he was somewhat unable to suppress his excitement. When Lang Song saw Tang Shan's reaction, he knew that he was overthinking. Tang Shan did not know anything at all. He should have just said it casually. When he thought about how the 6th young master's telegram had been sent directly to him, he laughed and said, "You're in luck, kid. The 6th young master has appointed the 1st Division of the Cold Front. This time, you can show your face properly." When he heard that it was Yang Chendong who had personally appointed the 1st Division of the Cold Front, Tang Shan was so excited that he did not know what to say. Was there finally a place for him to show his skills? When he thought about how he had been placed in the rear for so many years, he had almost forgotten what war was all about. Now that he could finally fight again and display his military prowess, tears flowed uncontrollably from the corners of his eyes. When he saw Tang Shan crying, Lang Song walked out from behind his desk and patted him on the shoulder. "I can understand how you feel. Facts have also proven that the 6th young master has never forgotten about you. Isn't this a chance for you to show off? How about this? The training work will be left to your teaching group. You can lead the other groups. When you go back, make the best use of your time and try to get to the front line as soon as possible. Speaking of which, the 3 provincial kings are very arrogant now. It's time to teach them how to behave. When he heard that the opponent was the 3 provincial kings, Ting Shan wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and laughed. Leng Tu, don't worry. This time, watch how the first division of the cold front takes care of him. I guarantee that he will be beaten until his parents can't recognize him. Ha ha ha. If it was anyone else who said this, even if it was another division of the cold front, Lang Song would not take it seriously. However, when it came from Ting Shan, it was completely different. The first division of the cold front wasn't just a simple teaching mission. They were also responsible for ensuring the safety of the Crimson Nest City. In order to better complete the mission, they were good at things like infiltration, assassination, decapitation, reconnaissance, and even naval and air forces. If there was a word to describe them, it would be the special forces of the cold front. When an army of tens of thousands of people suddenly appeared on the battlefield and faced people who had only undergone simple training and were holding outdated swords and spears, it would be a bit of a bully. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they would beat Zhu Huihua until his parents could not recognize him. Okay, I believe you. However, don't forget that the training mission cannot be abandoned. If one teaching group is not enough, you can tell me and I will transfer more people for you. Hearing these confident words, Lang Song knew that this battle was in the bag. The only difference was how big the scale of the battle would be. It's enough. One teaching group is enough. Usually, we only arrange for one regiment to train new recruits. The other regiments are doing all kinds of training. Tang Shan shook his head, indicating that even if the division's main force left, the work left behind would not be slack at all. Tang Shan left at a faster speed than when he came. When he rode the electric scooter back to the division headquarters of the 1st Division of the Cold Front, apart from the teaching group, the other 4 regimental commanders entered the meeting room. When everyone found out that the 1st Division of the Cold Front finally did not have to stay at home and could go out to fight, everyone was extremely excited. If it were not for Tang Shan's constant reminders and warnings, even the table would have been smashed. After a while, everyone finally calmed down. Then the regimental commander of the 1st Regiment, Jianghu, asked in an excited tone, "Sir, when can we set off?" "That's right. All these years, we've been watching our brothers' troops perform meritorious deeds at the front lines while we're the only ones left behind. We can't stand it anymore. If we can set off, the sooner the better." The 2nd Regiment commander, Xiao Shan, also shouted to express his attitude. Seeing how anxious the regimental commanders were, Ting Shan nodded. "Have you heard about the incident with Commander Bai Shuang of the Yi Army?" "Sir, are you talking about the snowstorm?" "Of course, I've heard about it. Yang Bao has recorded it. The Yi Army is really good. Under the heavy snow, other people would find it cold to walk around, but he insisted on it. He actually took the initiative to attack, and even achieved a complete victory. As expected of the 6th young master's favorite student." The 3rd Regiment commander, Fong Hao, said with an envious and admiring tone. After the 1st Regiment commander and the 2nd Regiment commander heard this, they kept nodding their heads. Obviously, they had the same view on this matter. Only the 4th Regiment commander, Chen Ziqiang, nodded his head first. Then his eyes suddenly widened as he said, "Wait, does Sir mean that we should also attack in the snowstorm like the Yi Army?" Chapter 1526. Tang Shan nodded proudly as he looked at Commander Chen Ziqiang with admiration. "Yes, that's what I was thinking. However, due to the weather, Yunnan province isn't that cold and there isn't any snow. In fact, it's quite warm right now. Therefore, it's not right to attack in a snowy day, but attacking in winter isn't wrong." "Okay, then let's attack now." The 4 commanders nodded in agreement. To them, it didn't matter what season they attacked in, the most important thing was to attack quickly. They couldn't wait to show off their skills on the battlefield. They also wanted to prove to the other Lung vanguard that 1st Commander Lung wasn't just good at training new recruits, his fighting ability was unparalleled. Everyone reached an agreement, and in the following time, they discussed the battle plan. Since 1st Commander Lung was going to leave the mountain, the bigger the commotion, the better. The more firearms and equipment they brought, the better. Based on the fact that their teacher was Tang Shan, There shouldn't be any problem. This senior was someone who had trained with a few of the Yang family's guards. With this layer of relationship, Jianghu happened to be in charge of the distribution of firearms in Crimson City. Wouldn't it be easy for him to obtain more bullets? Soon, the news that First Commander Leng was going to Yuanan province spread to the upper echelons. A telegram was quickly sent out from an inconspicuous building. In front of Zhu Huiyun's residence, the young man Mo Gui, who had appeared once before, delivered the telegram to him. Respected King, this time, the one coming to cause trouble for you is the First Commander Leng, the trump card of the 5-star army. After showing the contents of the telegram to Zhu Huiyun, Mo Gui took a few steps back and shut his mouth. He was just a messenger, and didn't have the authority to make decisions on many important matters. He only had reminders and suggestions. Even so, he would say what he should say, but he wouldn't say a word about what he shouldn't say. The tall Zhu Huichen took a glance at the telegram. When he looked at Mo Gui, his eyes were full of curiosity. He still didn't know who the master behind Mo Gui was, but his intuition told him that the identity of the mysterious person behind Mo Gui wasn't low. He might even be a powerful person. Otherwise, how could he know the movements of the 5-star army so quickly? Out of curiosity, Zhu Huichen sometimes had the idea to capture Mo Gui and torture him to find out who his master was. But in the end, reason prevailed over impulse. Since the other party didn't want to meet him, it meant that it wasn't time yet. He still needed to continue waiting. Otherwise, even if he captured the person, he might not be able to get the answer he wanted. Mr. Mo, thank you for your information. However, wasn't it a little too simple? For example, how many people were there in Lang Yi's division? From which direction they will march to trouble us? If we don't know anything, it's not easy to deal with it. Zhu Huichen said in a dissatisfied tone. Obviously, the other party was using him to go against Yang Chendong. Of course, this was also his intention. Seeing that the Vietnamese province was overflowing with wealth, who knew how many people under his rule would run to Xianxi's territory as long as they had the chance? Moreover, once they ran, they would never come back. For this reason, he didn't know how many people he had killed. However, the warning was still very limited. More or less, people hated the rich. Zhu Huichen had such an idea. He didn't find the reason from his own management. Instead, he unilaterally believed that the land in Yuanan province must be more fertile. Otherwise, how could so many people live there and never come back? After coveting it for a long time, Zhu Huichen had long taken Vietnam province as his own. In his opinion, Yang Chendong's territory was already so big. He didn't care if Yuanan province was less, so it shouldn't be a problem for him to take the opportunity to snatch the territory into his own hands. Once he had this food-producing province as a foundation, he could support more troops and have stronger strength. At that time, when he faced other people, he would have more confidence. This was a typical example of insatiable greed. Zhu Huichen didn't think about it. Why did other people have so many good things so they must give it to you? He had also fought hard for it, alright? Of course, under greed, people would take the initiative to ignore something. What Zhu Huichen ignored was the strength of the 5-star army. Perhaps it was because the 5-star army was either attacking the Mongolian army on the grassland near the first city, or going to other areas to expand their territory. It had been a long time since they moved in Yuanan province, so Zhu Huichen forgot that this neighbor was not to be trifled with. Or perhaps it was because after Burma was suddenly attacked by Bangla, it was a little difficult to deal with it. It made Zhu Huichen think that the current 5-star army was a little weak. At this time, Mr. Mo Gui, who had given him money for free, appeared again. He also brought the opportunity to attack Xianxia's territory and sent 1 million silver taels. For Zhu Huichen, who had military power in 3 provinces and a military strength of as many as 500,000 people, the effect of 1 million silver taels was very limited. But this proved that the other party's attitude was not right. Especially the other party's appearance was very clear about the internal situation of Xianxia. This was what made Zhu Huichen the most tempted. No matter how strong the opponent was, no matter how strong the fortress was, it was easy to be broken from the inside. Now that there was a spy, if he didn't take this opportunity to make a move, he was afraid that he would not have such an opportunity in the future. And he also heard that Bugnam of Gojoseon Yang Chendong was fighting with Timur and the other Khaganates at this time, and the progress was not smooth. Otherwise, Bangla would not have provoked the five-star army and not been retaliated. With such evidence, Zhu Huichen, who had always been greedy, finally made a move. He took the initiative to invade Yunnan province and smoothly robbed a lot of food stored in the granary, greatly alleviating the pressure on the army. After tasting the sweetness, Zhu Huichen wanted to continue to go deeper into Yunnan province. Just by occupying a few border cities, he got so many benefits. If he built this province, how many times more would he get than now? And once he had enough food and money, he would dare to face the five-star army head-on. As the saying goes, the ignorant are fearless. Zhu Huichen, who had never truly angered Yang Chendong, naturally did not have a taste of the other party's strength, to the point that he did not put them in his heart. This was destined to bring him a strong enemy, and even a fatal disaster. And since he was facing them, he had to give it his all. Zhu Huichen also understood this principle. So while he was constantly mobilizing the army, he was also paying attention to the movements of the five-star army. Fortunately, Mo Gue, this spy, helped him save a lot of effort. Now that he asked how many people the five-star army had and what the specific battle plan was, he wanted to know the enemy as well as himself. Regarding this question, Mo Gue helplessly shook his head and said, "Honorable King, Lang Yi should have mobilized 4 regiments and the direct subordinate battalions. In total there are less than 10,000 people. As for their battle plan, to be honest, no one knows, not even Bugnam of Gojoseon. After the five-star army received a mission, unless there is a detailed battle plan, they are allowed to do whatever they want on the battlefield." Do whatever they want? Zhu Huichen looked at Mo Gue as if he was joking. Mo Gue knew what Zhu Huichen was thinking from his expression. He shrugged and said, "Yes, they are allowed to do whatever they want. Believe me, King, this is Bugnam of Gojoseon's unique way of leading the army. This is also where his confidence lies." Speaking of this, Mo Gue had to admit that Yang Chendong completely delegated power to the army. Normal kings and kings wouldn't dare to do this. This was because mobilizing the army without orders could cause a mutiny at any time. Unless one had enough confidence in their own strength, who would dare to try this? One mistake and they would end up hurting themselves. However, Yang Chendong had done so. As a result, the generals under him had no more restraints. They were much freer and more flexible in doing things. This allowed them to better grasp the situation on the battlefield and win more battles by adapting to changes in time. Of course, outside of Yang Chendong, no one knew about the existence of the warehouse. This was Yang Chendong's true trump card. If someone really wanted to harm him, unless they could kill him in one blow, as long as he was given a chance to breathe, he would enter the great warehouse. When he came out, his appearance would change, and he would become a nightmare in the eyes of all his enemies. Mo Gue didn't know about this. He only admired Yang Chendong. However, thinking about the fact that they were enemies, he put this admiration away. Compared to Yang Chendong, who he couldn't see or touch but only heard of, he needed to be more loyal to his current master, because without his current master, he might have died a long time ago. It was his master who gave him food to eat. Because of this, he would be loyal to him for the rest of his life. Even if he had to die because of this, he wouldn't frown. Hearing Mo Gue's answer, Zhu Huiyun was somewhat dissatisfied, but there was nothing he could do. This was the time for both sides to be united. He believed that Mo Gue was telling the truth. He wouldn't lie to him, because it wouldn't be good for either side. However, not knowing the enemy's military plan was a headache. Luckily, there were less than 10,000 people here. Even if they could affect his plan, it would be limited. Thinking of this, Zhu Huiyun's expression became much better. He looked at Mo Gue and said, "I understand. I will tell the army to be careful. I hope Mr. Mo can find out about this army as soon as possible and provide us with useful information to create a chance for my army to surround them." "Yes, Your Majesty." Mo Gue nodded calmly. He didn't know how important First Lang's division was to Zhu Huiyun. That wasn't something he should think about. He just needed to follow orders. Reality proved that Zhu Huiyun didn't pay enough attention to First Lang's division. Or rather, even if he did, he wouldn't be able to guard against them. Chapter 1527. Lang's Son. It was the only way to enter Vietnam from the South Ming Empire. Previously, Yang Chendong had set up a shelter here, called the Lang Sun Shelter. It was specifically used to take in the Beiming citizens who had escaped from the South Ming Empire. After they were registered, they were given a place to settle down. Gradually, a small market was formed, and there were 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers stationed here, and they were treated as the Lang Sun army. However, when Zhu Huihua had led his troops south, this place had been taken over, and became an important supply route for him. According to Zhu Huihua, Vietnam used to be the Annam province, and the Ming Empire had set up a regime here, and managed this place. Now, he was just reclaiming it. As for the fact that this place belonged to the Bugnam of Gojoseon and Yang Chendong, he did not mention a word, as though he had forgotten about it. This was what they meant by having a good reason to attack. This was what it meant to be a bitch, yet still want to build a monument to his chastity. This time, in order to deal a blow to Zhu Huihua's arrogance, Lang Yijun's main target was Lang Sun. The reason why they chose this place was because it was an important supply route. As long as they controlled this place, the wealth that Zhu Huihua had plundered from Vietnam would not be able to be transported back to Guangxi. Secondly, by taking over this place, they would be able to cut off the retreat route of Zhu Huihua's troops. Following this, they could close the door and beat the dog, slowly playing a game of cat and mouse with the enemy. Since this place was so important, the 3 provincial armies would naturally be heavily garrisoned, with a total of 2,000 soldiers. To guard this place of less than 4 li, it could be said that they placed a lot of importance on this place. However, when Lang Yi Regiment's 1st Regiment Commander Chung who brought a regiment of soldiers here, the fate of these 2,000 soldiers was already decided. Regiment Commander, let our 1st Battalion be the vanguard. The 1st Battalion Commander, Feng Zhan, requested. Regiment Commander, our 2nd Battalion wants to be the vanguard. The 2nd Battalion Commander Wang Jinlong stood up and rushed to be the vanguard. Following that, the 3rd Battalion Commander Su Degang, 4th Battalion Commander Hu Jun, and even the Security Company Commander Sun Dewei also stood up, looking as though they wanted to be the vanguard. It was a good thing for the commanders and soldiers to have morale, but it was impossible for all of them to be the vanguard. This gave Commander Chung Hu a headache. In the end, he decided to be fair and said, "Stop King arguing. Battalions 1 to 4. Attack from 4 directions. Remember, don't use guns if you don't have to. Don't let anyone escape. This regiment commander will lead the guards to guard the perimeter. You better not let anyone escape from your direction. If it's the battalion that escapes the most, he can keep his mouth shut the next time the vanguard attack. Do you understand?" If Chung Hu were to sit down and patiently reason with these fierce generals, it would be very difficult to get through. Facing these people who claim to be the boss of the world, he had to be even more domineering than them, or even be a bastard. It was common for him to curse. Sometimes the more it was like this, the more they would listen and even be convinced. When they heard Chung Hu say that all 4 battalions would be the vanguard, the 4 battalion commanders were immediately happy. They looked at each other, their eyes full of challenge and competition. The 1st Battalion Commander Feng Zhan patted his chest and said, "Rest assured, Commander. Our 1st Battalion will not let a single enemy escape. Our 2nd Battalion will too." The 2nd Battalion Commander Wang Jinlong patted his chest, his face full of confidence. Soon, all 4 battalion commanders expressed their opinions. Chung Hu saw this and was happy in his heart, but his mouth was unforgiving. "All right, don't brag in front of me. Whether it's a mule or a horse, let's take it for a walk. If someone escapes from your hands, then this regiment commander will punish them according to the law. At that time, don't be unconvinced. All right, I'll give you 2 hours to prepare. Now, let's start." The 4 battalion commanders each led a direction and quickly left. With only 2 hours, they needed to move the troops to the designated location and formulate a plan of attack. Time was a bit tight. However, to the elite soldiers of the 1st Battalion, this was just child's play. In the past, who knew how many times they had practiced? Although this was not a drill and they were going to kill people on the battlefield, they would not feel any difference. When the training content was implanted in their bones, the difference between a drill and a real battle was only the difference between seeing blood and not seeing blood. However, to the soldiers of the 1st Battalion, although they rarely went to the battlefield, it did not mean that they had never gone to the battlefield before. When Xianxia was still very weak, they had also gone to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Right now they were just reliving that long-lost feeling. So what was the big deal? 4 battalions, each battalion had 4 companies, a total of 1,600 people. They quickly moved around the outskirts of Langsun, looking for a route to attack. Because of their movements, the sky gradually darkened. The 2 hours that Jianghu had mentioned before was when the sky turned dark. For the regiment that was used to night training, this was not a problem at all. On the contrary, the soldiers of the 3 provinces who were already surrounded were a different story. As the sky slowly darkened, bonfires were lit all around the barracks of the 3 provinces. From time to time, there would be soldiers patrolling with swords and spears. However, most of the soldiers had already returned to the barracks built by the Langsun army to rest. Vietnam had a tropical climate, with heavy rainfall and high humidity throughout the year. Even at the end of January, the temperature was still minus 20 degrees Celsius. Even at night, it was still more than 10 degrees Celsius. Living here, there was no need to worry about the cold. Even if it was a simple barack, one would not feel cold sleeping in it. In an environment where there was no entertainment at night, as soon as the sky turned dark, most of the soldiers had already eaten dinner and gone to sleep. Only the officers, with their women in their arms, still had to work for a while. As a Chiliarch, as well as the garrison general of Langsun, Gung Chun, at this moment, there were 2 naked women waiting for him on his bed. At this moment, he was ready to do something. These 2 women were plundered by him from nearby areas, and they were quite pretty. Originally, their hometown was in Guangxi, but due to the chaos of war, they had reached a point where they could no longer live. After hearing that there was a stable job and a safe environment in the nearby Vietnam province, the family moved here and really lived a peaceful life for a period of time. What they did not expect was for the 3 provinces to suddenly charge in. They plundered their village, brutally killed their village's militia, and robbed their wealth. Even the decent women were taken away, and became the playthings of the generals of the 3 provinces. Their beautiful life had just begun, but very quickly, it returned to how it was before, causing the 2 women to want to cry but have no tears. If it was not for the fact that their families were still in the hands of the generals, and if they did not obey, they would have already committed suicide. With their weakness in the hands of others, they could not commit suicide, so they washed their faces with tears all day long. In Gung Chun's eyes, it made him very angry. He could not avoid another round of punches and kicks. Except for their faces, the 2 women were already full of scars. However, even so, they could not escape from Gung Chun's vicious hands at night. When night came to the 2 women, it was as though they had come to hell. However, they did not know that a new hope was right in front of them, because at this moment, it was time for the 1st Regiment to make their move. After 2 hours, the soldiers of the 4 battalions had all returned to their positions. The battalion commander and a few company commanders sat together and quickly came up with a battle plan. It was worth mentioning that each battalion left a mobile company behind, to prevent any enemies from escaping. They remembered the words of their regiment commander, Jianghu, and did not want to lose the chance to fight again because of an enemy that escaped. When the clock on the military watch pointed at the same time, the 4 battalions of the Cold Vanguard Battalion darted out from the surrounding forest like leopards. Under the cover of the moonlight, their figures were like ghosts as they approached the camp of the 3 provinces. Every soldier was a corps member, and had trained new recruits before, and had been a squad leader before. There was even a certain proportion of soldiers, and the proportion was not low. They had all obtained good rankings in the competition. It was not an exaggeration to say that this kind of king's army was like using a cannon to kill a mosquito when facing the 3 provinces that did not have any vigilance. Many of the soldiers of the 3 provinces were recruited as able-bodied men. Being a soldier was not voluntary, and there was no need to talk about serious training. Often, they just relied on brute force to fight. These soldiers did not know what a night battle was, what a sneak attack was, what a close combat battle was, and what a special attack was. When faced with the Cold Vanguard Battalion that was everywhere, they could only passively take a beating. They could not even make a sound. The first to make a move was the soldiers of the 1st Battalion. They set their sights on the patrolling soldiers of the 3 provinces that were guarding the east of them. There were exactly 10 patrolling soldiers, and it was the same number as a squad of the Cold Vanguard Battalion. After Battalion Commander Feng Zhan made a gesture, the 1st Company, 1st Platoon, and 1st Squad moved out. Based on the squad's usual formation, each soldier chose a corresponding position, and each soldier held a short dagger in their hands. After the patrolling soldiers passed by a bonfire and fell into darkness, they made their move. Looking from afar, One figure after another suddenly flew out of the darkness. Next, the figures fell to the ground one after another. Then, there was no movement at all. About 10 seconds later, the figure of the first squad leader appeared from the darkness and made an okay gesture to the outside. Hee, we got them. The rest of the platoons, attack immediately, and kill those sleeping soldiers of the 3 provinces. Battalion Commander Feng Zhan chuckled, and gave out the order softly. A large number of figures appeared behind him, and each of them moved in an orderly manner towards their target camp. Chapter 1528. This was just a small part of the battlefield. In the other parts of the Langshan camp, the same scene was happening at the same time. One after another, the patrolling soldiers were killed. One after another, the soldiers of the 3 provinces did not even have the chance to struggle before their souls returned to the underworld. In this battle, the 1st Regiment had no intention of taking any prisoners. Although these people were all Han, they had to be prepared to pay the price with their lives. Without taking any prisoners, all the soldiers did not have any misgivings when they took action. They could use whatever skills they had. However, what made them feel regretful was that there were too few opponents. More than 1,600 people were only enough to take care of 2,300 provincial king soldiers. Once a warrior killed more than 2 people, it usually meant that there were warriors who didn't kill anyone. They were not even on the same level. It was not an exaggeration to say that a 25-year-old adult was fighting a 2-year-old child. In less than a quarter of an hour, the 2,300 soldiers were all killed. Only Geng Chun was left in the main room. On the other hand, the 5-star army did not have a single death or injury. There were only a few people who had indignant expressions. It was clear that they had acted too late, and did not manage to kill a single enemy. Sometimes, war was also about equality. Leaving Geng Chun alive was not to say that no one could kill him, but to leave him for their regiment commander Jianghu. When torches appeared in the camp, Regiment Commander Jianghu walked into the main tent accompanied by the guards. Just now, he had divided a company of guards into 4 groups to prevent any enemies from escaping. They were not afraid of their whereabouts being exposed, but they felt that it was a disgrace to let the enemy escape from their hands when they were already prepared. However, what made Jianghu gratified was that from the beginning to the end, not a single enemy had escaped. This was enough to prove that the performance of his 4 battalion commanders was perfect. When he walked into the main tent, he looked at Feng Zhan and the other battalion commanders with a look of praise. Regiment commander, all the enemies have been killed without leaving a single one. Right now, only their general is still in the main room. Do you want this subordinate to take care of him for you? Battalion Commander Feng Zhan walked up and smiled in a fawning manner. Scram! He casually kicked Feng Zhan's butt, who didn't dodge at all. Then he chuckled and said, "You've all had your fill. It's time for this leader to move his hands and feet." After saying that, Jianghu strode towards the main room. At this moment, he could already see that there were quite a few soldiers standing outside the main building. They had already surrounded the place and clearly pointed out the enemy general's position. In the main room, Geng Chun was still fast asleep. As soon as the sky turned dark, he would do some exercise. Then, he would wake up in the middle of the night. In addition to the normal night patrol, he would also have to do some exercise. This had already become a routine of his life. The soldiers of the cold front moved very lightly, so Geng Chun was not disturbed. It was only when Jianghu walked into the main room with a few battalion commanders that he suddenly felt something. His right hand instinctively reached under his pillow. There was a dagger there that could be used to injure the enemy in close combat. Get out! When his arm was less than a few inches away from the dagger, he suddenly felt a huge force coming from his arm. Then, Geng Chun felt his entire body fly up and directly hit the paper window of the main tent. His body flew out of the room. Find clothes for them to wear. Jianghu shook his head as he looked at the 2 Han women shivering under the blankets. Then, he turned around and walked out with a face full of anger. In the open space outside the main room, the naked Geng Chun was looking around in horror. He looked at the soldiers of the 5-star army who were looking at him with smiles on their faces. He couldn't imagine how the outside world would become like this when he only took a short nap. Where did his soldiers go? Whether they died or ran away, why wasn't there any sound at all? He didn't feel like he slept very deeply, so why was it like this? Was this a dream? When he thought of this, Geng Chun slapped himself hard on the face. The sound was quite loud and painful. When the pain came, it attracted the laughter of the soldiers around him. This made him realize that this was not a dream, but reality. Do you think a slap can solve your evil deeds? At this time, Jianghu just happened to walk out of the main room. After seeing Geng Chun's actions, especially the naked scene, and thinking of the two Han women that he had taken advantage of, he couldn't help but feel angry. A person who couldn't even take care of his own body, how could he take care of the army? If this person was one of his soldiers, he would have been beheaded long ago. Jianghu strode out and stood in front of Geng Chun with a dark face. Who are you people? Do you know that I am the chilly arch of the 3-star army? Are you trying to make an enemy of the 3-star army by doing this? Geng Chun had already exposed everything. At this moment, he didn't care about shame. Instead, he puffed out his chest and put on an aggressive appearance. Obviously, he wanted to gain the initiative by striking first. Make an enemy? You're not worthy. Jianghu spat. Then, he moved his arm and a short sharp blade appeared in his hand. Then, the blade flashed and a large wound appeared on Geng Chun's right arm. Ah! Geng Chun's arm was injured and he was bleeding a lot. The pain and the sense of shame made Geng Chun scream involuntarily. Jianghu's face remained indifferent. He took a step forward and waved his sharp blade. As invaders, the moment you made your move, you became the enemy of the 5-star army. Now, you still dare to threaten us with such big words? Swoosh. Another blade slashed down on his left arm. I'll fight you to the death. Both of his arms were injured. If this continued, he would become a bloody man. Geng Chun shouted and rushed forward. He wanted to fight back. In the face of the charging figure, Jianghu advanced instead of retreating. In the process of advancing, he leaned his body to the side and easily dodged the opponent's charge. Just as the two sides crossed each other, the sharp blade fell again. This time, it fell right between Geng Chun's crotch. Immediately, a small piece of meat was thrown into the air and separated from Geng Chun's body. Ah! Geng Chun, whose little penis was cut off, couldn't help but scream again. His voice was so miserable that it made everyone's expression change. Jianghu was unmoved. Instead, he continued to stride toward Geng Chun, who was shouting and shouting. As he walked, he said, "Bullying a woman, and a Han woman at that. It's the same as bullying my sisters. You should be punished even more." Another blade flashed and a foot-long wound appeared on Geng Chun's right leg. Finally, he couldn't run anymore and fell to the ground with a plop. Geng Chun, who had been stabbed 4 times in a row, looked at Jianghu, who was slowly walking toward him with a frightened expression. He shouted with all his strength, "Don't cut me anymore. Doesn't the 5-star army give preferential treatment to captives? I surrender, I surrender." Surrender? You're not worthy. After Jianghu's voice fell, he slashed several more times. None of them were fatal. They were all places with thick flesh and blood. Soon, Geng Chun, who had fallen to the ground and curled up into a ball, became a bloody man. His whole body was covered in blood and looked very scary. His body kept shaking for about 2 minutes. Finally, there was no movement. Just like that, the chilly arch of 3 provinces was scared to death by Jianghu. He was afraid that Jianghu would attack him again. With this fear in his heart, he died. When he died, his eyes bulged out. This was the most obvious sign of being scared to death. Phew! Jianghu exhaled. After killing Geng Chun, the depression in his heart dissipated a lot. When he opened his mouth again, he had already regained his composure. Show everyone the consequences of going against the 5-star army. Yes. Feng Zhan and the other battalion commanders were the first to agree. Following that, the other soldiers also agreed. At this moment, they didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt because of the cruel actions of their commander. Since they were going to become the enemy of the 5-star army, then they should have already prepared themselves for this. That night, the moonlight was brighter than usual. It was as if the clouds had parted to reveal the blue sky. On the night of the 1st Regiment's operation in Lang Sun, the 1st Regiment commander, Ting Shan, also came to Vietnam's Beijiang prefecture and met with the governor, Zhang Da. Ever since Vietnam was conquered by Xianxia, there were 3 governors. They were Song Zhe, Luan Shaochen, and the current governor, Zhang Da. Under the efforts of the 3 provincial governors, the entire Yunnan province could be said to have undergone a great change. The land was reclaimed, the minerals were mined, and various factories and workshops were set up everywhere. The people here were already living a good life with ample food and clothing. After Xianxia took over, he had the ambition to make this place even better. In fact, in the past 2 years, when he was developing in this direction, the sudden war disrupted everything. Not only did it cause many of the original plans to be unable to be realized, but it also caused the loss of a lot of territory and a lot of people. As the border between Vietnam and South Ming, Vietnam's military development wasn't considered backward. At the very least, there were 30,000 well-trained Vietnamese soldiers in the entire province. It was because when Myanmar was attacked, they had sent 20,000 soldiers to help. Now that the 3 provinces suddenly attacked, with only 10,000 soldiers, they naturally couldn't handle it. Lang Sun, Kuei Dai, and Lang Sun fell one after another, forcing them to retreat to Beijiang Prefecture. But even there, they didn't dare to guarantee that they could hold on. In the past few days of fighting, they had already lost 6,000 soldiers. Now, there were only 4,000 left in the prefecture. Due to the invasion of the 3 provinces, Xianxia had started to recruit soldiers. However, the new recruits had no combat experience, and it was fine to let them fight. Chapter 1529. Without sufficient troops, Xianxia could only send telegrams back to Chichen City, at the same time going to the front lines to boost morale. During the day, the 3 provincial armies launched yet another assault, mobilizing a total of 10,000 men. Using the walls of Beijiang City, the Vietnamese army barely managed to hold on, but they also lost over 1,000 men, while another 2,000 were injured. Seeing that there were only 1,000 soldiers left, even though Xianxia was unwilling, he had no choice but to prepare to retreat. Right at this time, Tang Shan arrived, together with the 3rd and 4th platoons of the 1st Regiment. Although there were only 4,000 of them, it was the Cold Vanguard, and it was the legendary Cold Vanguard 1st Regiment. When Governor Xianxia heard the news, he personally went out to welcome them. When he saw Tang Shan, tears immediately rolled down his cheeks. "Commander Tang, you're finally here." A young general beside Xianxia was also curiously sizing up the group of Cold Vanguard warriors in green military uniforms. When he saw the pitch-black muskets on their backs, he couldn't help but reveal an envious expression. However, when he saw that there weren't many of them and heard that there were only about 4,000 of them, he couldn't help but reveal a look of disappointment. This time, the 3 provincial armies had mobilized a total of 120,000 men. Even if they had suffered some losses along the way, they were still left with 100,000 men. Could these 4,000 men really hold on? He had his doubts. This young general was called Chen Bai, and his father was one of the famous generals of Annan Province, Chen Di. When Yang Chendong reclaimed this place, he had contributed greatly, and was appointed as one of the generals of Annan Province. Furthermore, his family was allowed to stay here forever. In the blink of an eye, more than a decade had passed, and Chen Di had grown old. As such, he recommended his son, Chen Bai, to replace him. This time, when the 3 provincial armies attacked, it was Chen Bai who led the army to defend. Just from the looks of the battle, it was not easy for him to achieve this. After all, to be able to order the organized army to retreat while fighting under a surprise attack and give the civilians at the rear some time to prepare for the scorched earth clearing work, he could already be considered a suitable young general. "Governor Zhang, you've worked hard. How's the situation now?" After shaking hands with Governor Zhang De, Tang Shan asked with concern. "It's not looking good." "Right. Let me introduce you. Chen Di, this is Commander Tang Shan of the Cold Vanguard 1st Regiment. Commander Tang, this is General Chen Bai, who has been fighting with the 3 provincial armies." "Oh, his father is Chen Di." "He is one of the 3 generals appointed by the 6th Young Master." Hearing that Chen Bai's father was Chen Di, Tang Shan could not help but take a closer look at him. Under normal circumstances, foreign generals were not trusted by Han generals, and this was naturally due to Yang Chendong's influence. He had already said the phrase, "Those who are not of my race must have a different heart," countless times, but all the old people who had been with him for a long time all knew this. However, Chen Bai was Chen Di's son. Chen Di had surrendered to Yang Chendong when Yang Chendong was still very weak. When Yang Chendong occupied Annan at that time, he had made great contributions. So much so that when the Great Migration was carried out, the Chen family was allowed to stay in Yunnan province. From that point of view, Chen Di's son could still be trusted. Not to mention, Chen Bai performed well in the face of the three provincial armies' attack. With a small number of troops, he managed to block the main force of more than 100,000 soldiers from the three provincial armies. Although he was also forced to retreat, it was not easy for him to do so. "Hello, General Chen." At the thought of this, Tang Shan took the initiative to extend his right hand to Chen Bai. Hello, Commander Ting. I've heard a lot about you." Chen Bai was very excited as he hurriedly wiped his hands with his clothes before shaking hands with Tang Shan. Tang Shan's first impression of Chen Bai was not bad. At the very least, he was not like some Han generals who would not even look at foreign generals. Just based on this point, Chen Bai recognized him as a teacher. After exchanging greetings, they naturally began to talk about the battle in Beijiang Prefecture. Using Governor Zhang Da's words, the situation was extremely critical now. If Tang Shan hadn't rushed over, they would have been defeated in the battle tomorrow and lost Beijiang Prefecture. Once Beijiang Prefecture, which was an important transportation route, was taken, they would be able to go to Fuliang or Biandong at will. If that were to happen, they would be in a passive position. After listening to Governor Zhang Da's words carefully and seeing that Chen Bai had the same thoughts, Tang Shan smiled and said, "I understand what you two mean. Beijiang Prefecture is an important transportation route. We can't lose it, right?" "Yes." Governor Zhang Da nodded solemnly. Once this place was lost, it would affect more prefectures. If that were to happen, Yunnan province would be destroyed. In that case, he would become a sinner. "Okay, I understand. In that case, Beijiang Prefecture will become an impenetrable fortress, and no one will be able to take a step into this place." Tang Shan nodded solemnly before speaking in a heroic manner. Although he had only brought 2 regiments with him for this trip, with a total of about 4,000 people, with the advanced firearms in their hands and the city walls as their support, the 100,000 soldiers from the 3 provinces really couldn't do anything to him. In fact, if it weren't for Yang Qindong's telegram, he would have probably led Lang Yi's division to attack Zhu Huihua's lair directly if they were to stabilize the situation. However, military orders had to be obeyed. Since Yang Qindong had sent him a telegram, he had to execute it. As for the reason behind this, it was not something that a mere teacher like him could ask. If the 6th young master wanted to tell him, he would naturally tell him. Since he didn't, he wouldn't get an answer even if he asked. Tang Shan's arrival gave Zhang Da, Chen Bai, and the rest some reassurance. However, Lang Yi's division only had more than 4,000 people, after all. Whether or not they could defeat the attack of the 3 provinces tomorrow would depend on reality. They would wait and see. Some people spent the night in apprehension. On the other hand, the Cold Blade warriors who had just arrived all had a good night's sleep. It was also one of the subjects of their usual training. They would rest when they were supposed to so as to ensure that they had sufficient energy for the upcoming battle. If a soldier didn't know how to rest, he wouldn't be considered a good soldier. The night passed peacefully. On the morning of the 2nd day, the soldiers of the Cold Front had just finished their breakfast when they heard the thunderous sound of war drums. When Tang Shan and the others reached the top of the city wall, they could see from afar that the army of the 3 provinces was slowly approaching. From afar, the army of the 3 provinces looked quite imposing. For example, the neat formation, the horizontal and vertical lines, the flags and the many pitch-black cannons that were slowly advancing were all proof that this was a well-trained army. They've even brought out the cannons. Seems like they're definitely going to take down Beijiang Prefecture. When General Chen Bai saw this scene, there was some shock in his eyes. Although the previous attacks were also intense, the other party didn't bring out the cannons. However, the fact that they brought out the cannons this time was enough to prove their determination. Similarly, in the face of the cannons' attack, Beijiang Prefecture definitely wouldn't be able to defend if it was still in his hands. Even if it was in the hands of the Cold Blade warriors, Chen Bai wasn't confident enough. He couldn't help but look at Commander Tang Shan who was beside him. If one was suspicious, one had to use them. That was the philosophy that Yang Qindong had used for the generals of foreign races. That was precisely the reason that Yang Qindong wouldn't arrange any cannons for them in ordinary provinces, in case something really went wrong and they got hurt. That was also the reason why Chen Bai was so unfamiliar and fearful of cannons. However, when faced with the same problem, Ting Shan and the rest of the Cold Blade warriors weren't unfamiliar with it at all. On the contrary, when they saw the enemy's cannons, they even turned to look at the two commanders behind them and chuckled. That's an 80mm cannon. Its muzzle isn't small. Based on their technology, it shouldn't be an explosive round, but a solid round like the Red Barbarian cannon. There's nothing to be afraid of, third leader Feng Hao said with a chuckle. The larger the caliber of the cannon, the more powerful it would be. However, it would also be more troublesome to manufacture. If it was a cannon with a small caliber, they would have to consider if the other party was going to use exploding shells. After all, those things were complicated to manufacture, and they were really powerful. However, with such a large caliber, the chances of them being exploding shells would be extremely slim. Since it wasn't exploding shells, what was there to be afraid of? As long as they could identify the trajectory of the enemy's cannons, experienced people would be able to dodge them easily. Yes, there's nothing to be afraid of. Third Commander, I'll leave these cannons to you. I don't want to see the city wall of Beijiang Prefecture being hit by a cannonball, even if it's a solid shell. Do you understand? Ting Shan immediately made a request. Yes, Master. Feng Hao was fearless about such a request. He immediately stood at attention and saluted before walking away. That made 4th Commander Chen Zicheng, who was at the side, extremely envious. He was still thinking, if I were the one who took on the task just now, would I be the one to destroy the enemy's cannons? Okay, Commander Chen, you don't have to be envious. Immediately send the soldiers of your 4th Regiment to the city tower. After the enemy's cannons are destroyed, they will definitely launch a siege. That will be the time for you to perform. Remember, don't waste any bullets, understand? Ting Shan obviously could tell what Chen Zicheng meant. Hence, he gave the order to the 4th Regiment. Yes, please rest assured, Master. Watch the performance of the 4th Regiment, Chen Zicheng chuckled. Putting on a performance was enough to prove his confidence and his recognition of the marksmanship of the soldiers of the 4th Regiment. Chapter 1530. The troops of the 3 provinces did not stop advancing, but because the cannons were too heavy, their speed of advancement was not very fast. They seemed to be trying to scare the Vietnamese army with that formation and instill fear in them. In that case, once the cannons landed, the city of Beijiang Prefecture might collapse on its own. Wang Zhangjiang, the commander of the troops of the 3 provinces, was very proud of that move. He had already asked around and found out that there were only slightly more than 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers in Beijiang Prefecture. In front of his army of 100,000 soldiers, that was not even enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. If it were in the past, he might not even take out something as good as the cannons. After all, it was one of his trump cards that he would only use in times of crisis. However, the king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huifu, sent someone to inform him that the elite Lung Fong of the 5-star army was about to arrive at the battlefield in Vietnam. That was an army of pure firearms, which made Wang Zhangjiang feel the pressure. He was determined not to wait any longer. Hence, he took out the cannons with the intention of completely conquering Beijiang Prefecture. By then, he would be able to go anywhere. By then, even if the Leng Fong came, they would not be able to do anything to him if they had too few people. With full confidence, the cannons appeared and pressed towards the front of Beijiang Prefecture. At this moment, Feng Hao, the commander of the 3rd Regiment, had also led the regiment's artillery battery up the city tower and began adjusting the cannons. He did not forget Commander Tungshan's words just now. He did not allow any cannons to land on the city walls of Beijiang Prefecture. In other words, he could not give the enemy a chance to fire the cannons. Even so, he had to speed up. 6 100mm mortars were placed on the city tower. Commander Feng Hao personally took command and tested the first cannonball. Everyone listened to the command and prepared for the first test shot. Target. Enemy cannons. High 2, 3, 3, 3 to the north, 2 to the east, 2 to the right, 6 to the right, fire. Boom. A cannonball was fired from the barrel and blasted towards the troops of the 3 provinces that were slowly approaching. After the sound of the cannons, there was the sound of the cannonballs exploding. Under the aftermath of the explosion, when the cannonballs landed in the middle of the army of the 3 provinces, a small piece of empty space was blasted open. Within 30 to 40 feet of the explosion, all the soldiers of the 3 provinces were either killed or injured. A cannonball landed and injured some of the soldiers of the three provinces, but it did not hit any of the cannons. Instead, it exploded a few feet behind the cannons. Looking at this scene, Feng Hao muttered, "The goat's horns are a little high. Come on, adjust a little more and get ready to fire." After just one round, Feng Hao already had a good idea of where the cannon would land. When he opened his mouth again, his face was filled with confidence. Target. Enemy artillery. The 6 cannons were positioned 2 or 3 times higher. The north side was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. The north side was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. The direction was positioned 2 or 3 times higher, and the direction was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. 3, 2, 1. Fire. After Feng Hao recited a series of professional terms, the 6 cannoneers continuously adjusted the direction of the cannons in their hands. When the number 1 was finished, the 6 cannoneers simultaneously sounded. Then, the 6 cannoneers landed on the ground. The cannoneers flew over the city walls and landed on the soldiers of the 3 provinces. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. After the adjustments, the accuracy of the cannoneers greatly increased. Out of the 6 cannonballs, a total of 4 cannonballs hit the enemy cannons. This attracted the cheers of Governor Jianghu and General Chen Bai on the city walls. What's going on? Commander Feng Hao did not look happy at all. On the contrary, he turned his head and stared fiercely at the 2 cannoneers who did not hit the target. He looked at the 2 cannoneers who lowered their heads and did not speak. It was normal for the cannoneers to have some deviation. Not to mention that the enemy cannons were constantly moving. Although the speed was very slow, it was still moving. To be able to hit 4 out of 6 cannoneers was already a very good result. In any cold vanguard division, such a standard was enough to make them proud. However, the problem was that this was the first division of the Langfeng division. These people were all instructors. Even the 2 cannoneers had taught thousands of students. Now that it was their turn to attack, they actually missed. It was really a terrible feeling. After being reprimanded by Feng Hao, the 2 cannoneers also became ruthless. They first stood up and observed the position of the target. Then, they ordered someone to reload the cannoneers and fired the cannoneers. Fortunately, they finally hit the target this time. The cannoneers landed less than 10 feet away from the cannoneers of the 3 provinces. The powerful shockwave directly destroyed the cannoneers and overturned them on the ground. Cannoneers were fired one after another. The cannoneers of the 3 provinces had one less cannon after another. Within a short period of time, all 30 cannoneers were destroyed. As expected, Commander Tengshan's request was met. Not a single cannoneer was allowed to land on the city walls of Beijiang Prefecture. This result also shocked Zhang De and Chen Bai, who were watching at the side. They did not expect the cannoneers of the 1st Division of the Langfeng Division to be so powerful. While the 1st Division of the Langfeng Division was impressive, the soldiers of the 3 provinces suffered. When the commander of the troops, Wang Zhangjiang, saw that the 30 cannoneers that he had sent out had all been destroyed before they could even reach the designated firing position, he was infuriated. Someone, order the front troops to launch an attack. Their cannoneers may be powerful, but there's a limit to the number of cannoneers they have. Are they going to blow up all our soldiers? The truth was just as Commander Tengshan had expected. After the cannoneers failed, the soldiers of the 3 provinces launched a ground attack. After receiving the order, 10,000 soldiers of the 3 provinces rushed towards Beijiang Prefecture like an avalanche. Good timing. Everyone, listen up. Aim at the target before you fire. Don't embarrass us. Try to eliminate one enemy with one bullet. The 4th Regiment commander, Chen Ziqiang's yell resounded throughout the entire city tower of Beijiang Prefecture. Afterwards, when the 2 sides were about 400 to 500 steps away, the soldiers of the Langfeng Division began firing. As the bullets whizzed out of the barrels, the soldiers of the 3 provinces who were charging at the front fell into a pool of blood one after another. From afar, it looked like they were harvesting chives. They were in a neat and orderly manner. More and more soldiers of the 3 provinces fell in the path of the charge, making the soldiers behind who were ready to attack look terrified. They were humans of flesh and blood. They wouldn't do such a foolish thing if they still wanted to attack despite knowing that they were going to die. Fortunately, Wang Zhangjiang did not intend to force them. After seeing the amazing marksmanship of the Langfeng Division, He knew that the morale of the soldiers was now in a mess. If they were to attack, they might not succeed even if they had to pay a huge price. Since that was the case, he had no choice but to order the entire army to stop attacking and retreat. It seemed that the attack this time was as loud as thunder, but small as raindrops. The 3 provinces came and went. On the city tower, Zhang De, Chen Bai, and the rest couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief before cheering. They finally believed that even though the number of Lang Feng's soldiers was small, they would have no problem defending Beijiang Prefecture with them around. Tang Shan, who had long known everything, watched calmly as the soldiers of the 3 provinces retreated. He was still thinking that if he were to launch an attack now, he would definitely be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Unfortunately, military orders had to be obeyed. His mission was only to defend Beijiang Prefecture, and he couldn't doubt anything else. After Wang Zhangjiang retreated, he even sent someone to report the appearance of Lung Feng to the 3 provincial kings immediately. Lang Feng's sudden appearance had indeed caught everyone off guard. However, in the letter, Wang Zhangjiang expressed that he would continue to work hard even if he failed this time. He did not mention whether he would be able to withstand Lang Feng's attack. Perhaps he didn't even think about whether the 5-star army, which only had a few thousand soldiers, would dare to attack their 100,000-strong army. That was the outcome that Yang Chendong wanted. It all started with the secret telegram sent by Yao Yingjun. Yao Yingjun, the backbone of the security bureau, was also one of the elders. Due to his good looks, he was arranged to stay by Zhu Huiyun's side. He got to know Zhu Lian, the princess of Yongsheng County, and won her heart. In the end, Zhu Huiyun rebelled, which also meant that his mission was completed and he could return to the security bureau to report. However, he didn't do that and instead protected Zhu Lian to escape from the clutches of the demons. He then formed an opposing force and started causing trouble behind Zhu Huiyun's back. Although Yao Yingjun left with Zhu Lian, he still arranged for some intelligence personnel to stay by Zhu Huiyun's side. Although they were not important figures, they could still find out some information that outsiders couldn't. Not long ago, the spy sent some information that a Mr. Mo had become a frequent visitor of the 3 provincial kings' residences. According to their observations, this person should have a certain connection with the higher-ups of Xianxia. For example, Zhu Huiyun found out about Lung Yi's reinforcements in Yunnan province in advance. There was actually such a thing? After Yao Yingjun found out, he naturally didn't dare to be careless. He immediately used the radio to report to the higher-ups. When it was sent to Yang Chendong, he was really shocked. How powerful was the Yang faction? Everyone who was involved in it had a deep feeling. With such a powerful backing, Yang Chendong couldn't figure out who would side with an outsider. He didn't believe that Zhu Huiyun had arranged for someone to enter Xianxia in advance. It wasn't that he looked down on the 3 provincial kings, but this person didn't have such vision. From the information reported by Yao Yingjun, the person who contacted Zhu Huiyun knew a lot of things. This proved that the person's rank wasn't too low. Then, it was a high-level cadre? Who could it be? Yang Chendong felt a chill down his spine when he thought about how there were spies among the senior officers under his command, or people who had done something unfavorable to him. If this tumor wasn't dealt with, then wouldn't he have to sleep with one eye open? Chapter 1531. In addition, if the other party was a high-ranking officer with military authority, didn't that mean that his family in Xichen City could be in danger at any time? Although Yang Wu had always been responsible for the safety of the royal palace, it was still reassuring. But he couldn't guard against the unsuspecting. Besides, Yang Chendong didn't like being on the defensive all the time. He had to find out the big traitor, and to achieve this goal, he couldn't kill Zhu Huicheng now. Otherwise, what if the traitor disappeared again when he saw that things were not going well? He wanted to personally meet Zhu Huiyun and see if there was a chance to find this traitor. Yang Chendong even had a feeling that even Zhu Huiyun didn't know who the person who had given him information on Xianxia was. This was the truly frightening part. This was why Yang Chendong had sent a telegram to Tingshan, ordering him not to take the initiative to attack. All he needed to do was defend Beijiang Prefecture and prevent the 5 provinces' army from entering Vietnam to cause trouble. The timely appearance of Beijiang Prefecture's 1st Division Lang had thwarted their plan to enter Vietnam. When the telegram was sent to Yang Chendong, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Then, His gaze fell on the Timur Empire that was surrounded by enemies. Because of the heavy snow, the five-star army's attack had been forced to stop. While they were resting, they had also begun another operation, and that was to cause internal strife in the Timur Empire. After repeated battles, the situation had undergone a fundamental change. Of the 200,000 cavalry of the Timur Empire, 100,000 had been heavily injured, leaving only 150,000. The military strength of the Timur Empire had been severely weakened. The main forces of the five-star army had smoothly joined forces, forming a massive encirclement around the enemy, turning it into a beast in a cage. As a result, the people of the Timur Empire were in a state of panic. Other than the Crimean army and the distant Yusang army, the other khaganates had all fallen into the hands of Xianxia. They had no outside help or hope. With these three advantages, the people of the Timur Empire were in a state of panic. There were many people who feared death and many who wanted to surrender. Just like when they had dealt with the Golden Horde, the reason they had been able to achieve victory so quickly and easily was largely due to the surrender of Grey and the others. Even when they had destroyed the Ras Duchy, wasn't it because of Peter and the others? In history, wasn't it also because of Wu Songgui's sacrifice that the Qing army had been able to conquer the world? All of this proved one thing. Even the strongest fortress could be easily breached from the inside. Yang Chendong was searching for the Timur Empire's most powerful clans. The Timur Empire's most powerful clans. Head of the Timur Empire, Odin Gerald, represented the entire shaman family, which was once a glorious existence. The Timur of the Timu, S's, when the Great Khan's Great Khan, the Timu's the Timur. The Timu's Sa's Aa, Saat. In the Timur Empire, the Timur Empire's shaman clan was also the most powerful clan. No one dared to look down on them. Perhaps it was because he was afraid of death, or perhaps it was because he was dissatisfied with being suppressed by the Great Khan, but in any case, the head of the shaman clan, head of the Timur Empire, secretly sent people out of the city to contact the five-star army. They expressed their willingness to help the five-star army get rid of this huge problem. With head of the Timur Empire's cooperation, Yang Chendong immediately abandoned the small and medium clans of the Timur Empire that had contacted him. After all, the destruction of the Timur Empire was certain. It was only a matter of time. Since that was the case, the more people he needed to cooperate with, the greater the price he would have to pay. In that case, it would be better to only contact head of the Timur Empire. Even if there were benefits, it would only benefit one clan. It was better than having more foreign clans benefit from it. The dispatched envoy quickly returned to the city and met with Odin Gerald. He expressed that the five-star army had accepted their good intentions. He also stated that once they took over the entire Timur Empire, the shaman family would receive special protection, and they would even be able to keep 1/10 of their wealth. This was exactly what head of the Timur Empire wanted. Now that the five-star army had agreed, he could do some things with peace of mind. Head of the Timur Empire, was not worried that the five-star army would play tricks on him. Once they did so, the five-star army would find it even more difficult to find people who would cooperate with them in the future. There was no enmity between the two of them, so why must they make things difficult for him? Knowing that the five-star army wouldn't go back on their word, Odin Gerald called over all the clan leaders and explained the five-star army's reply. Previously, the family had held a meeting to discuss the surrender of the five-star army. Back then, it had been unanimously approved. Now that everyone was informed, it was time for them to take action. As expected of one of the greatest nobles, the descendants of the shaman family had already infiltrated all walks of life in the Timur Empire. Even in the army, there were many disciples. Once these people gathered together, the power they could display was very strong. Even Khan Amor had to give them some face. When the entire family was mobilized, the locations of the Timur Empire's hidden troops were quickly exposed and sent to the five-star army. After all, the daily consumption of these troops wasn't small. They wouldn't appear for no reason, so they needed someone to send them supplies. As long as someone sent them, it was equivalent to having a clue. Under careful investigation, some secrets were no longer secrets. After sending the information to the five-star army, Odin Gerald set his sights on Great General Mandu Latu. The reason why the Timur Empire was able to confront the five-star army without falling into a disadvantage was due to the terrain. First, it was due to the complex terrain of the country. There were mountains everywhere. Once the safety of the country wasn't ensured, the army would face the danger of having their retreat cut off. This meant that there wasn't enough supplies to make up for it. This was a very dangerous matter for an army that was marching. The army was scattered and used guerrilla warfare to attack the logistics of the five-star army, as well as some lone troops. This created a lot of pressure for the five-star army. This was also the reason why Yang Chendong didn't move forward. And the instigator of all this was Great General Mandu Latu. Odin Gerald contacted him in order to persuade him. Even if he wasn't used by the five-star army, at least he shouldn't be an enemy of the five-star army. Regarding the arrival of Odungerel, Mandu Lato, who was in the mansion, didn't feel any surprise. Judging from his calm face, this seemed to be something he had expected long ago. Speaking of which, who wouldn't know about the filthy matters between the Shaman clan and Khan Amor if they were well informed? If it wasn't for the sudden appearance of the five-star army, Great Khan Amor would have been cleaning up the internal strife in the Timur Empire. It could also be said that the arrival of the five-star army saved the Shaman family and prevented them from being cleaned up so quickly. After all, in the face of an external enemy, a ruler that had to deal with internal strife wasn't a confident ruler. Because doing so would only cause pain to those close to him and delight his enemies. Not all of them were as stubborn as Baldi Jiang. It was precisely because he understood this that Mandu Latu didn't think that Odin Gerald's actions were strange. He could see that once Great Khan Amor won this battle, the next to deal with Odin Gerald would be Great Khan Amor. Taking advantage of the chaos, how could they be willing to wait helplessly for death? How could they not do something? In the main hall of his mansion, Mandu Latu received Odin Gerald. In the huge hall, there were only the two of them at this moment. All the servants had been sent out. Looking at the scene in front of him, the smile on Odin Gerald's face didn't diminish. At this time, he didn't know how to describe this great General Mandu Latu who was strategizing on the battlefield. Receiving him in the main hall and not in the secret room, this showed that the other party had a clear conscience. So even if Great Khan Amor knew about this matter, he couldn't directly blame him. He then drove everyone out of the hall, making it no different from a secret room. This allowed Odin Gerald to speak his mind without worry. This kind of behavior took into account the wishes and thoughts of both sides. From this point alone, it was clear that Mancharatal was a smart man. And Odin Gerald liked to deal with smart people, so after he sat down, the first thing he said was, "Great General, have you made your choice?" This was indeed a straightforward question. When Mandu Latu heard it, the other party was stunned for a moment. Obviously, he didn't expect Odin Gerald to be so direct. But the other party asked directly, and he couldn't answer directly. Since he could become a great general who was in charge of hundreds of thousands of troops, he naturally didn't like to be passive, but was very willing to take the initiative. Regarding this question he didn't answer, but just chuckled and said, "Odin Gerald, you should drink tea first." This tea was obtained from the Han people, and it cost this great general a lot of money. Asking and not answering, Odin Gerald didn't find it strange after hearing it. If the other party gave an answer to his question, then he would find it strange. Smiling, Odin Gerald picked up the teacup in front of him and took a sip. He immediately praised, "Not bad, it is indeed a good tea. The Han people have a long history, and some of their good things are not something we can compare to. If one day we can live with them, drink this kind of tea every day, and taste delicious food, that would be a happy thing." Is Great General right? You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.